Hello everyone and welcome back to Sleepless Cosmos. Here on this channel, I share real-life scary stories about strange things that happen to help you relax and fall asleep. Before we start, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you are watching from now. Find a comfortable place to sit back and let's begin. The emergency call came in at 11:23 p.m. on a Tuesday. Building losing heat fast. Tenants calling the property manager every 10 minutes. Overtime pay would be time and a half after PM, which meant an extra $100 I could put toward Thursday's mortgage payment. Sarah was pulling a double at the hospital anyway, so an empty house was waiting for me either way. I've been fixing heating and cooling systems for 8 years now. Started right after high school. Worked my way up from apprentice to senior technician. The union made sure I got proper training on every system carrier. Train, York, you name it. Most calls are simple. Dirty filters, tripped breakers, frozen coils. But emergency calls in November usually mean serious problems. Meridian business. Park sits right off Route 41, about 20 miles outside the city. 12-story glass and steel building. Built in 1987 back when they thought mirrored windows looked futuristic. I've been servicing their HVAC systems for 3 years. The building has two main units, a carrier, 30 GTN080 chiller system on the roof, and backup heat pumps on floors 6 and 10. Property manager keeps good maintenance records, which makes my job easier. The temperature was sitting at 23 degrees when I pulled into the parking lot at 11:47 p.m. Wind chill made it feel like single digits. My breath turned to fog the second I stepped out of my van. I could see my tools in the back, digital manifold gauge, refrigerant leak detector, headlamp, and the tablet with all the system manuals. Everything I needed to diagnose whatever was wrong with their heating. Bob, the security guard, was waiting in the lobby with his usual cup of coffee. He's been working there for 3 years. Knows my schedule better than I do sometimes. Good guy. Always makes sure I can get where I need to go without setting off alarms. Cold one tonight, Jake, he said, handing me the building keys. Cleaning crew finished up around 11:30. You got the whole place to yourself. I signed in on his clipboard, noted the time, and headed for the elevator. The work order was simple. Compressor fault code 47. Building losing heat fast. Code 47 meant the compressor was shutting down on high pressure. Could be a dirty condenser, bad expansion valve, or worst case, a refrigerant leak. I'd seen it dozens of times. The elevator right to the roof axis gave me time to think through the diagnosis. Check the obvious stuff first: power, controls, safety switches, then move to the refrigerant system. My tools would tell me everything I needed to know. The EMF detector would find any refrigerant leaks. The manifold gauge would show me system pressures. And the diagnostic tablet would pull error codes directly from the unit's computer. My phone showed full signal strength. For bars, plenty of. Battery life. I always check before starting. Roof work safety protocols drilled into me during training. Fall protection. Communication with dispatch. Emergency procedures. The union takes safety seriously after what happened to Jimmy Martinez 5 years ago. Route 41 was quiet for a Tuesday night, but I could hear the usual sounds of late-night traffic through the building's windows. Distant hum of the highway, occasional semi-truck engine brake. The city never really sleeps, just gets quieter after midnight. I grabbed my tools from the van and headed back inside. Bob was reading his newspaper. Police scanner crackling quietly in the background. Normal Tuesday night at Meridian Business Park. Nothing out of the ordinary. The elevator stopped between the 8th and 9th floors for about 15 seconds. No emergency alarm. No indication of a problem. Just stopped. The floor indicator kept showing 8, but I could feel we were between floors. Then it started moving again, like nothing happened. Weird, I muttered, checking my phone. 11:50 p.m. still on schedule. The rooftop access door was already unlocked. That bothered me. Security protocols require all roof access to be secured after hours. Bob must have forgotten to lock it after the last maintenance visit. I made a mental note to mention it when I signed out. Up on the roof, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Route 41 is usually busy even at midnight. Truckers, late commuters, people getting a second shift, but I couldn't hear any. Traffic. The whole world seemed muffled, like someone had turned down the volume on the city. The carrier unit was running, but something felt wrong. The diagnostic display showed temperature readings that didn't make sense. Outside air temperature was reading 45 degrees, but my phone weather app showed 23 degrees. I tapped the screen, thinking maybe it was frozen, but the numbers kept changing. My Cell phone signal dropped from 4 bars to 1 bar. That happens sometimes on rooftops, especially in cold weather. Metal buildings can interfere with signals. I made sure dispatch could still reach me on the radio. I switched on my headlamp and started walking toward the unit. The beam seemed dimmer than usual, like the light was being absorbed before it could reach very far. I checked the batteries fully charged. Maybe the cold was affecting the LED output. The digital manifold gauge started giving me weird readings as soon as I connected it to the service ports. Pressure readings would jump from normal to impossible numbers, then settle back to what I expected. High side pressure showed 285 psi, then suddenly 450 psi, then back to 285. Low side did the same thing. I disconnected the gauges and checked the connections. Everything looked clean and tight. Connected them again. Same problem. The readings would fluctuate wildly for a few seconds, then stabilize at normal operating pressures. Behind me, I heard the elevator motor running. That was strange. The building was empty, and I was the only one with access. Probably just the system running automatic diagnostics. Modern elevators do that sometimes. The building's emergency lighting system kicked on for about 10 seconds, then went back to normal. I could see the red lights flashing on every floor through the windows. Emergency systems test themselves automatically, but usually not at midnight. I started checking the refrigerant lines for leaks, running my detector along every joint and connection. The wind had died down completely, which was unusual for November. My breath vapor was acting strange too. Instead of dissipating normally, it seemed to hang in the air longer than it should. The compressor unit shut down while I was testing. Not a normal cycle completion, it just stopped. The diagnostic display showed no error codes, no fault conditions. According to the computer, everything was working perfectly, but the unit wasn't running. I tried restarting it manually. The startup sequence began normally, then stopped halfway through. Still no error codes. The system was getting power. All the safeties were good, but something was preventing it from running. My radio crackled with static when I tried to contact dispatch. Central, this is Morrison on site at Meridian Business Park. I'm getting some unusual readings up here. Nothing but static. I tried again. Same result. The radio was working fine. I could hear the usual background chatter from other technicians, but my transmissions weren't getting through. I checked my phone again. The battery had dropped from 78% to 65% in just a few minutes. No apps running, no calls or texts. The phone was just draining power sitting in my pocket. The security camera red lights that I could see from the rooftop all turned off at the same time. The building had cameras on every floor, usually visible as small red dots through the windows. They all went dark simultaneously, then came back on about 30 seconds later. Something was definitely wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. All my equipment was acting strange, but there was no logical explanation for it. The building systems were having problems, but not the kind of problems that showed up in the diagnostic computers. I decided to focus on the heating system and ignore the weird stuff. Maybe there was electrical interference from somewhere nearby. Radio towers, power lines, something like that. I'd seen electromagnetic interference affect sensitive equipment before, but deep down, I knew this was different. This wasn't normal equipment failure or electrical interference. This was something I'd never encountered in 8 years of service work. At 12:03 a.m., my radio went completely dead. Not just static complete. Silence. The display still showed it was powered on, but no sound came through the speaker. 4 minutes later, at 12:07, it suddenly started working again like nothing had happened. The compressor unit kept shutting down every time I tried to start it. The diagnostic computer insisted everything was fine, but the unit refused to run. I'd never seen anything like it. These systems are designed to fail safely if there's a problem. The computer throws in every code and shuts down with a specific fault message. But this unit was shutting down with no explanation. I noticed a shadow on the adjacent building that didn't match any structure I could see. It was perfectly geometric, like a triangle, but there was nothing in the right position to cast that shadow. The building's exterior lights were all working, but this shadow seemed to exist independently of any light source. My digital tools started displaying error codes that made no sense. The refrigerant leak detector showed error E47X9, which wasn't in any manual I'd ever seen. The pressure gauges displayed SYS0X01F when I called the manufacturer's 24-hour technical support. They said those codes didn't exist in their system. Temperature readings were getting stranger. My digital thermometer showed a 15-degree difference between readings taken just 20 feet apart. The north side of the roof was reading 28 degrees. The south side was showing 43 degrees. No weather conditions could explain that kind of variation. Across such a small area, a car alarm started going off in the parking lot. Not just random beeping, it was following a specific pattern. 3 long blasts, 2 short ones, pause, then repeat. I looked down, but couldn't see which car it was. The alarm rang for about 2 minutes in that exact pattern, then stopped. The building's windows were reflecting light in a way that didn't make sense. From my position on the roof, I could see the pattern of lighted windows on the floors below. They formed a geometric design that shouldn't have been possible. The offices were empty, and the cleaning crew had finished hours ago. But the lights were arranged in perfect triangular patterns on multiple floors. My EMF detector, which I used to find refrigerant leaks, started showing strong electromagnetic readings even when I wasn't near any electrical equipment. The readings were strongest when I pointed it toward the sky, which made no sense. Refrigerant doesn't exist in the atmosphere at detectable levels. My phone battery was draining fast from 65% to 23% in just 4 minutes. I wasn't using any apps, wasn't making calls, wasn't even looking at the screen. The phone was just sitting in my pocket, burning through power at an impossible rate. I tried to take a photo of the weird shadow on the adjacent building. The camera app opened, but when I tapped the shutter button, nothing happened. The screen froze for a few seconds, then the app closed itself. I tried again, same result. My phone camera had never malfunctioned like that before. The security cameras, visible from the rooftop, were acting strange. The red indicator lights would turn off for exactly 30 seconds, then turn back on, then repeat the cycle. All of them were doing it in perfect synchronization. I started to feel disoriented. The rooftop layout seemed wrong somehow. I'd been up there dozens of times. Knew every piece of equipment, every access panel, every safety rail. But distances felt different. The walk from the elevator to the HVAC unit seemed longer than usual. At 12:15 a.m. I saw the lights, 3 points of light in perfect triangular formation, about 200 feet above the building. They weren't moving, just hovering there. No sound, no visible means of propulsion. The lights were bright enough to see clearly, but they weren't casting any illumination on the building or the surrounding area. I stood there staring at them for what felt like a few minutes. They maintained perfect geometric spacing, like they were connected by invisible rods. Then they started moving. The movement was impossible. The entire formation would stop instantly, change direction by 90 degrees, then accelerate without any transition period. Physics doesn't work that way. Objects with mass can't change direction instantaneously, especially not objects large enough to carry lights that bright. I tried to take a photo again. The camera app opened, but as soon as I pointed the phone toward the lights, the screen went black. The app didn't crash this time, it just showed a black screen where the camera view should have been. When I pointed the phone away from the lights, the camera worked normally. The temperature dropped 8 degrees in 30 seconds. I watched my digital thermometer go from 23 degrees to 15 degrees. No weather system changes that fast. The air around me felt different to thicker, like the pressure had changed. All the building systems shut down simultaneously. Emergency lighting, security cameras, elevator motors, HVAC units, everything. The entire building went dark for about 10 seconds. Then all the systems came back online in sequence. Lights first, then cameras, then mechanical systems. I checked my phone for the time. 12:38 a.m. But that was impossible. I'd been on the roof for less than an hour, and I'd been watching the lights for maybe 10 minutes. I should have been looking at 12:25 a.m. at the latest. The lights were still there, still maintaining their perfect formation. I realized I'd been standing in the same spot for much longer than I thought. My legs were getting stiff, my hands were numb with cold, but I couldn't remember deciding to stay in that position. Something was very wrong. This wasn't equipment failure or electrical interference. This was something else entirely. The lights moved closer, not gradually. They were 200 feet away 1 second, then 100 feet away the next. No movement between positions, just instant relocation. The triangular formation remained perfect, but now I could see they weren't just lights. They were attached to something solid. The object was dark, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. I could only see its outline by the way it blocked out stars. It was huge, easily 150 feet across and completely silent. No engine noise, no air displacement, nothing. something that size should have been generating massive sound. But it moved through the air like it weighed nothing. My phone died. Not low battery, completely dead. The screen went black and wouldn't respond to any buttons. The battery indicator had shown 23% just minutes before. I pulled out my backup flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on either. Brand new batteries. Tested just last week. I tried to run for the elevator, but my legs wouldn't respond properly. Not paralyzed exactly, but like I was moving through thick liquid. Each step required enormous effort, and I wasn't covering much ground. The elevator door, normally a 30-second walk, seemed impossibly far away. Air pressure changed dramatically. My ears popped like I was in a fast descending airplane. I could feel the pressure difference in my chest, making it hard to breathe normally. The wind had stopped completely, not just died down, but stopped. Even my breath vapor hung motionless in the air. Sound became muffled, like I was underwater. I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing, but external sounds were dampened. The usual city noise was gone. Even the building's mechanical systems, which had been running constantly, was silent. The object moved directly overhead. I could see its outline against the stars, definitely triangular, with rounded corners. No visible engines, no control surfaces, nothing that looked like conventional aircraft. It was just there, defying everything I knew about physics and engineering. A beam of light came down from the center of the object. Not a searchlight, this was different. The light seemed solid, like I could touch it. It illuminated a perfect circle about 20 feet across, centered on where I was standing. But the light didn't scatter or reflect of anything. It just stopped at the edges of the circle. Inside the light, I could see clearly. Outside the circle, everything was darker than it should have been. The city lights, the building illumination, even the starlight seemed dimmed. It was like the object was absorbing light from everywhere, except the area directly below it. I felt a tingling sensation, like static electricity but stronger. The hair on my arms stood up, and I could taste metal in my mouth. My skin felt warm despite the cold air. The sensation was getting stronger, like the intensity was being increased gradually. Time became fluid. I was aware of standing in the light, but I couldn't track how long I'd been there. Seconds felt like minutes, or maybe minutes felt like seconds. My digital watch had stopped at 12:41 a.m. but I could feel time passing differently than the numbers suggested. I tried to look directly at the object above me, but my eyes wouldn't focus properly. The shape kept shifting, like I was seeing it through a heat shimmer. Sometimes it looked solid, sometimes it seemed translucent. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The tingling sensation intensified until it became uncomfortable. My vision started to blur around the edges. I could feel something probing at my thoughts, like fingers rifling through files in my mind. Not painful, but invasive. Wrong. I remember thinking about my wife Sarah, about our mortgage, about the work order I was supposed to be completing. But those thoughts felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. The immediate reality was the light, the object, the presence of something vast and incomprehensible. I tried to call out, but no. Sound came from my throat. I could feel my vocal cords vibrating, but the air around me wasn't carrying sound normally. It was like trying to speak in a vacuum. The examination began. I'm not sure how else to describe it. Something was studying me, learning about me, cataloging information. I could feel attention focused on me with impossible intensity. Not human. Attention, something else. Something that understood me better than I understood myself. My memories were being accessed. Childhood experiences, technical training, personal relationships, fears, hopes, everything that made me who I was. The process was thorough and impersonal, like a computer scanning files. I saw flashes of other places, other times, other people, standing in similar lights, undergoing similar examinations. Pilots, farmers, police officers, scientists, all experiencing the same careful, clinical attention. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. The intensity peaked, then suddenly stopped. The light disappeared. The pressure returned to normal, and I was alone on the rooftop. The object was gone. The stars were visible again. The city sounds returned. I was lying on the gravel roof surface, about 15 feet from where I'd been standing. My tools were scattered around me. My phone was working again, showing 1:47 a.m. More than an hour had passed, but I could only account for about 20 minutes of conscious experience. I gathered my tools with shaking hands. Everything was working normally now. The phone, the flashlight, the diagnostic equipment. The HVAC unit was running perfectly, all fault codes cleared. According to the system computer, there had never been any problems. I tried to take photos of the area where I'd been lying, looking for any evidence of what had happened. The camera worked fine, but the photos showed nothing unusual, just a normal rooftop at night. Gravel and equipment and safety railings. My radio crackled to life. Morrison, this is Central. What's your status at Meridian? System's running normally now. False alarm, I guess. Intermittent fault that cleared itself. Copy that. Head on home. Thanks for the quick response. I packed up my equipment and headed for the elevator. In the lobby, Bob was reading his newspaper like nothing had happened. All fixed? He asked. Yeah, running fine now. Hey, did you notice any problems with the building systems tonight? Power outages? Anything like that? Nope. Quiet night. Everything's been normal. I signed out on his clipboard. Noted the time as 1:52 a.m. The work order was simple enough to complete. Intermittent compressor fault, system restored. No further action required. In the parking lot, I checked my van for any sign of the car alarm I'd heard earlier. Every vehicle looked normal. No signs of disturbance. I asked Bob about it when I returned his keys. Car alarm. I didn't hear any car alarm tonight. The drive home was uneventful. Route 41 was busy with normal late night traffic. Semi-trucks, shift workers, people heading home from bars. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Home. I tried to research what had happened. I searched online for similar experiences, checked government websites for aircraft activity reports, even called the local airport to ask about unusual flights. Nothing. I requested a different service territory the next week, telling my supervisor I needed to work closer to home due to family scheduling conflicts. He approved it without question. 6 months later, I still check the news for reports of unusual aircraft sightings. I installed an EMF detector app on my phone and carry a backup camera. I avoid emergency calls in isolated areas, especially at night. My sleep patterns changed. I wake up at 12:41 a.m. most nights. Always check the time. Always remember the stopwatch. Sarah asks why I'm restless, why I spend so much time looking out windows, why I jump when aircraft pass overhead. I never told her about the night. I never told anyone. Who would believe a story about lights in the sky and missing time? I'm a technician, not a storyteller. I fix things that are broken, solve problems that have logical solutions. But I know what I experienced. I know we're not alone. And I know that sometimes, late at night when I'm working alone on a rooftop, something might be watching me work. The maintenance window is always open. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been driving big rigs for years now. Not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and I'm good at it. That night, March 8th, a Wednesday, I was hauling auto parts from Omaha to Cleveland in my 2019 Peterbilt 579. Beautiful truck, really. 53-foot dry van, loaded to 78,000 pounds gross weight. Right at the legal limit. But that's how you make money in this business. I remember checking my chronometer to 30 for AM. I was eastbound on I-80, somewhere between Grand Island and Kearney. The dot hours of service regulations are strict. Drivers can only work 11 hours before taking a 10-hour break. I had 6 hours left on my clock. Plenty of time to reach my planned fuel stop in Des Moines. My fuel gauge showed 187 gallons remaining, which was perfect. I'd filled up in North Platte. I knew exactly how much diesel my Cummins engine burned per mile. The weather was clear that night. Outside temperature read 31 degrees on my dash, with light winds from the northwest. Perfect driving conditions. No ice, no snow, good visibility. I could see the stars clearly through my windshield, something you don't get to enjoy much in a city. This stretch of I-80 is like my backyard. I've driven it so many times I could probably do it with my eyes closed. I know every track stop, every way station, every good place to grab a meal. The mile markers are like old friends. Mile 245 means you're about 20 minutes from the Grand Island exit. Mile 250 puts you right at the halfway point to Des Moines. I was saving money for a house down payment, had $47,000 in my account, and needed $50,000 for the place I wanted in Ohio. 3 more months of hard driving, and I'd have it. That's what kept me going during the long nights. The thought of having my own place, not sleeping in a truck cab every night. My CB radio was chattering away on channel 19. 3 other drivers were within about 20 miles of me to eastbound, 1 westbound. We'd been talking off and on for the past hour. Driver named Buck was about 10 miles ahead of me in a refrigerated trailer. Another guy went by Diesel Dan, was maybe 15 miles back, running heavy equipment to Iowa. The westbound driver was hauling cattle to Colorado. Normal truck driver talk complaining about fuel prices, not regulations, discussing the best routes around construction zones. I'd taken my last break at the Big Island truck stop about 90 minutes earlier. Quick fuel top off, used the restroom, grabbed a coffee and a sandwich. The night clerk was a nice lady named Betty who'd been working there for 15 years. We chatted for a few minutes about the weather forecast looked like clear skies for the next 2 days, which was good news for drivers. As I approached mile marker to 147, I was thinking about my schedule. If I maintained 65 miles per hour and didn't hit any delays, I'd reach Des Moines by AM. That would put me in Cleveland by Thursday afternoon, right on time for my Friday morning delivery. I had this run down to a science. The highway ahead looked normal, dark asphalt, yellow lines reflecting. My headlights, familiar fence posts and farmland on both sides. I'd been driving for 3 hours straight since my last break, not unusual for me. My back felt fine. My eyes were alert, and I was drinking plenty of water to stay hydrated. Everything was perfectly normal. Just another night on I-80, making money, getting closer to my dream of owning a house. In about 10 minutes, I'd be at mile marker to 150, then 255, then to 160. I had the whole route memorized. I had no idea that in the next few minutes, my entire understanding of the world was about to change forever. The first thing that felt wrong was the silence on the CB radio. I was just passing mile marker to 146 when all the chatter stopped. Not gradually, it cut off mid-sentence. Buck had been talking about a construction zone near Des Moines, and his voice just ended like someone had flipped a switch. I keyed my microphone. Hey, anybody out there? Buck, you copy? Static. Pure static on channel 19. That's weird, I thought. I tried channel 17, then 20, then back to 19. Nothing but white noise. CB radios don't just stop working like that, especially not on I-80. There's always somebody talking on this stretch. It's one of the busiest freight corridors in the country. Maybe it was my radio. I checked the connections, made sure the antenna was still attached. Everything looked normal. The radio was powered on. Volume was up. Squelch was set correctly. I'd been talking to other drivers just 2 minutes ago, and my GPS started acting up. The screen flickered, and I heard the familiar voice say, recalculating route. But I hadn't changed course. I was still on I-80, same direction, same speed. The GPS showed me on the correct highway, but it seemed confused about something. I rolled down my window to get some fresh air, and that's when I noticed something else strange. I couldn't smell anything. Now, that might not sound like much, but on I-80 through Nebraska, you can always smell something. Cattle farms, feedlots, cornfields, diesel fumes from other trucks. The air has a smell to it, sometimes good, sometimes not so good, but always something. That night, the air was completely neutral, like breathing inside a clean room. My diesel engine was running smooth, but the RPM needle was doing tiny fluctuations. Nothing major, just little movements up and down by maybe 50 revolutions per minute. Not enough to affect my speed or cause any problems, but my Cummins engine usually runs steady as a rock. I'd had this truck for 2 years and knew its quirks. This wasn't normal. I checked my dashboard clock. 2:41 a.m. 7 minutes since I'd last looked. That seemed right, but something felt off about the time. Like maybe more time had passed than the clock showed. You know that feeling when you're sitting somewhere and time feels slower or faster than it should. That's what I was experiencing. My headlights seemed different too. They're LED headlights, really bright. And normally I can see the road clearly for at least 500 feet ahead. But that night, it felt like my light wasn't reaching as far. The darkness ahead looked thicker somehow, like it was pushing back against my headlights. I realized I hadn't seen another truck for at least 10 minutes. That's really unusual on I-80 at night. This highway is busy 24/7 with freight traffic. Even at 2:40 a.m., you'd expect to see headlights in your mirrors or taillights ahead of you. But the road was empty in both directions. My air pressure gauge caught my attention. It dropped from 120 psi to 110, then back up to 120. Air brakes need consistent pressure to work properly, and fluctuations like that could mean trouble. But it only happened once, then the gauge stayed steady. I tried the radio again. scanning through all the channels. Every single station was pure static. Not even music stations or talk radio, just white noise. I turned the radio off and back on. Same thing. That's when I saw the fog ahead. It was a wall of fog stretching across the highway, maybe a quarter mile in front of me. But the weather report had called for clear skies all night. The temperature was above freezing. No wind. Low humidity. Perfect conditions. Where was this fog coming from? As I got closer, the fog looked strange. It had sharp edges, like someone had drawn a line across the highway. Fog doesn't usually work that way. It's supposed to be wispy, gradual. This looked more like a grey wall sitting on the road. I slowed down to 50 miles per hour, then 45. You have to be careful driving big rigs in fog. 80,000 pounds takes a long time to stop, and visibility can drop to 0 in seconds. The fog was getting closer. I could see it was thick, really thick, like driving into a cloud. I'd driven through fog before, but this looked different. More solid somehow. I checked my mirrors one more time, hoping to see another truck behind me. Nothing. The road was completely empty except for me and this wall of fog that shouldn't exist. My hands were getting sweaty on the steering wheel. Everything felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was bothering me. The CB radio silence, the GPS glitch, the missing smells, the strange fog. Little things, but they were adding up. I was about to drive into that fog bank, and every instinct I had was telling me to stop. But I was on a highway doing 45 miles per hour in an 800-pound truck. You don't just stop on I-80. Other drivers depend on you to keep moving, to be predictable. The fog was 50 feet away now. Then 20, then 10. I drove into it, and everything changed. The fog swallowed my truck like we'd driven into a grey tunnel. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. But here's the thing that didn't make sense. My windshield wasn't getting wet. When you drive through fog, moisture should hit your windshield. You should need your wipers. But the glass stayed completely dry. I slowed down to 35 miles per hour, then 30. My speedometer read 65 miles per hour, but it felt like I was barely moving. You know how sometimes when you're really tired, everything seems to happen in slow motion. It was like that, except I was wide awake. Then I saw mile marker to 147. Nothing unusual about that. I'd been expecting it. But 30 seconds later, I saw another mile marker to 147. Same sign, same position relative to the fence posts. That's impossible. Mile markers are exactly 1 mile apart. I couldn't have driven 2 miles in 30 seconds. I slowed down more, looking carefully at the next mile marker. It was 248, normal. Then I saw 247 again. My GPS was showing my position on I-80, but the highway overlay had disappeared from the screen. Just a blue dot on a grey background. No roads, no landmarks, no reference points. Like I was driving through empty space. The engine temperature gauge climbed from 180 degrees to 195. That's not dangerous, but it's unusual. My Cummins engine runs cool, especially on flat highway with no load stress. I wasn't climbing any hills or working the engine hard. No reason for the temperature to increase. The CB radio crackled to life. I heard voices, but they weren't speaking English or any language I recognized. The voices were clear, not static filled, but the words made no sense. It sounded like multiple people having a conversation, but the words were all wrong. I tried to key my microphone to break into their conversation, but when I pressed the button, the voices stopped immediately. Complete silence. Then they resumed, still in that strange language. The fog around me was getting weirder. Instead of being evenly distributed, it had patterns. Geometric shapes. I could see clear sections next to thick sections, like someone had arranged the fog in a design. That's not how weather works. Fog is random, chaotic. This looked organized. My truck's electronic stability control activated with a beep. That system only kicks in when it detects the truck sliding or losing control. But I was driving straight, hands steady on the wheel, no ice on the road. The system corrected for a skid that wasn't happening. Ahead of me, I started seeing lights. Not headlights or taillights, these were different. They moved in ways that didn't match any vehicle I knew. Up and down, side to side, sometimes stopping completely in mid-air. The lights were bright white, almost blue, and they cast long shadows through the fog. I reached for my cell phone to call dispatch. No service. The phone showed no bars at all. But this section of I-80 has good cell tower coverage. I'd used my phone here hundreds of times before. I tried calling anyway. The phone showed call failed before I even finished dialing. The mile markers were getting really strange now. I saw 247, then 246, then 247 again, then 249. Like someone was shuffling them around while I drove. I started counting seconds between markers. Sometimes it took 2 minutes to reach the next one. Sometimes it took 10 seconds. The math didn't work. The lights ahead were getting brighter and closer. I could see they weren't attached to any vehicle. They were just floating in the fog, maybe 30 feet above the highway, moving in perfect geometric pattern circles. Figure eights, straight lines. I tried to slow down, but my truck wasn't responding normally. I pressed the brake pedal, felt it engage, but my speed stayed constant. The speedometer still read 65 miles per hour. But the sensation was like driving through thick syrup. Everything was moving too slowly. The fog suddenly became thicker on my left side and clearer on my right. I could see the fence posts and farmland on the right, but the left side was a solid grey wall. Fog doesn't work the way it's supposed to be affected by wind, temperature, humidity. This fog was ignoring all the rules. That's when I heard my name. The CB radio crackled, and a clear voice said, "Continue forward, Sarah, not Saracen or driver or my CB handle. Just Sarah," like whoever was speaking knew me personally. The voice was calm, neutral, neither male nor female. It didn't sound like any of the drivers I'd been talking to earlier. I kept my microphone with a shaking hand. "Who is this? How do you know my name?" Silence. Then the voice repeated, "Continue. Forward, Sarah." I hadn't told anyone my first name on the CB that night. Most drivers use handles or call signs, and that voice, it didn't sound quite human, too precise, too emotionless. The lights ahead were directly in front of me now. I could see they were attached to something huge, a structure of some kind, spanning the entire width of the highway, maybe 300 feet wide, triangular or diamond-shaped. It looked metallic, reflecting my headlights in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The thing was completely silent. An object that size should make noise, wind resistance, mechanical sounds, something. But I couldn't hear anything except my own engine and the hum of my tires on the asphalt. I tried to change lanes, to drive around whatever this was. But when I turned the steering wheel, nothing happened. The truck kept going straight, like the wheel wasn't connected to anything. I was heading directly toward this massive structure, and I couldn't steer away from it. The fog was starting to clear around the edges of the structure. I could see stars again, but they looked wrong. Too bright, arranged in patterns I didn't recognize. The moon was in the wrong position for the time of night. I was maybe 200 feet away from the structure when I realized I was going to pass directly underneath it. There was no way to stop, no way to turn. My truck was following the highway like it was on rails, heading straight for whatever was hanging above the road. The voice on the CB radio spoke again. "Do not be afraid, Sarah. Continue forward." But I was afraid. I was terrified. This wasn't natural. This wasn't normal. This wasn't supposed to be happening on I-80 in Nebraska at 2:45 a.m. on a Wednesday night. I was about to drive my truck underneath something that shouldn't exist, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I passed under the structure, and everything went dark, not gradually, instantly, like someone had turned off the sun. My headlights went out. The dashboard lights went out. The engine noise stopped. But somehow, impossibly, the truck kept moving forward at the same speed. You have to understand when a truck's electrical system fails, everything stops. No power steering, no power brakes, no engine. The truck should have immediately started, slowing down and becoming very difficult to control. But I was still moving smoothly down the highway, still maintaining 65 miles per hour, still going in a straight line. I couldn't see anything. Complete darkness, but I could feel something above me. A presence. Something massive and solid just a few feet over my truck. The air pressure in my cab changed, like when you drive through a tunnel or under a bridge. My ears popped. The temperature inside the truck dropped fast. I watched my breath start to fog up. The thermometer on my dash had been reading 72 degrees. I always keep the cab warm on cold nights, but suddenly it felt like it was maybe 50 degrees inside. I tried the radio again, but there was no power. I tried my cell phone, the screen was black. I tried the CB radio, the GPS, the engine controls. Nothing worked, but the truck kept moving. Then the lights came back on. Not my lights, different lights. White and blue, coming from above. They lit up the inside of my cab like daylight, but the light was wrong. It didn't cast shadows the way normal light does. Everything was evenly lit, like being inside a fluorescent bulb. I could see outside now. The highway was still there, but it looked different. The yellow lines were brighter, almost glowing. The asphalt looked newer, like it had just been paved. The fence posts and farmland were gone, replaced by flat, empty ground that stretched to the horizon. Above me, I could see the bottom of the structure. It was smooth and metallic, covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, like looking at oil on water, but three-dimensional. The patterns were beautiful and disturbing at the same time. I felt a buzzing sensation in my head, not painful, but weird, like someone was tuning a radio inside my brain. The buzzing got stronger, and then I started hearing sounds that weren't sounds, if that makes sense, like music, but not through my ears. I could feel it in my teeth, in my bones. The truck was still moving forward, but now I could see the end of the structure ahead. Normal highway, normal darkness, normal mile markers. Maybe another 100 feet and I'd be back in the real world. But then something changed. The buzzing in my head got louder, and I felt like I was being watched. Not just observed, studied. Like I was a bug under a microscope, and someone was taking notes. I tried to move my arms, but they felt heavy, like I was wearing thick gloves, or like the air had become thick as water. I could move, but it took effort. My movements felt slow and clumsy. The strange music in my head was getting more complex. Harmonies, rhythms, patterns that no human composer could create. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Part of me wanted to listen forever. Part of me wanted to scream. I could see the edge of the structure now. 20 feet away. 10 feet. 5 feet. Then I was out. My headlights came back on instantly. The dashboard lit up. The engine noise returned to normal. The temperature inside the cab jumped back to 72 degrees. Everything was exactly as it had been before. I looked at my dashboard clock. 2:53 a.m. I'd been under that structure for 8 minutes, but it had felt like hours. The highway ahead looked normal. Mile marker to 148, then 249, then 250. In the right order, at the right intervals. The fog was gone. The strange lights were gone. The CB radio was working again. I could hear Buck talking about Truck Stop Coffee in Iowa. I keyed my microphone. Hey, Buck, this is Sarah. Did you lose radio contact about 10 minutes ago? Negative, Sarah. Been chatting with Diesel Dan this whole time. You've been quiet though. Thought maybe you were taking a nap. I was trying to reach you guys. My radio went dead for a few minutes. Must be something with your equipment. We've been talking steady since Grand Island. I checked my fuel gauge. It showed 183 gallons. I burned 4 gallons in 8 minutes. That's impossible. My truck gets about 6.5 miles per gallon. In 8 minutes at 65 miles per hour. I should have used maybe 1 gallon. Where did the other 3 gallons go? I tried to make sense of what had happened. Equipment malfunction, microsleep episode, some kind of hallucination brought on by fatigue. But I felt wide awake. My logbook showed I'd been driving for less than 4 hours since my last break. I wasn't tired. I reached for my cell phone to call dispatch. I had full service again, all bars showing. But when I looked at the call log, there was an entry I didn't remember making. A call to my own number, lasting 8 minutes, starting at 2:45 a.m. I hadn't made that call. I'd been trying to call dispatch, not myself. And how do you call your own number? When I tried to listen to the voicemail, there was nothing. 8 minutes of silence. Mile marker to 151. Normal. 252. Normal. Everything was back to the way it should be. But I kept checking my mirrors, looking for lights in the sky. I kept listening to the CB radio, hoping to hear that strange voice again. I kept watching the mile markers, making sure they were in the right order. The rest of the drive to Des Moines was completely normal. I fueled up, used the restroom, grabbed some coffee. The fuel pump showed I used exactly the amount I expected based on my mileage. No missing gallons. But I remembered the gauge reading 183 after the incident. I didn't mention what happened to the fuel desk clerk. What would I say? Hey, I think I drove under a UFO and lost 8 minutes. They'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was crazy, but I knew what I'd experienced. Something impossible had happened on I-80 near mile marker to 147. Something that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist, but did exist. And somehow, it knew my name. I finished the run to Cleveland without any other problems. Delivered the auto parts on time. Got my paperwork signed. Headed back west. Normal trucking routine. But I couldn't stop thinking about that night. When I got home to my apartment in Omaha, I tried to research what I'd experienced. I searched online for UFO sightings I-80 Nebraska and Strange Lights Highway and missing time trackers. found a few stories that sounded similar, but nothing exactly like what happened to me. I thought about reporting it to someone. But who? The police? Hello, officer. I think I drove under a UFO. The Department of Transportation. Hey, Dot. There's an alien structure spanning I-80 mile marker 247. My trucking company. Boss, I had a close encounter with extraterrestrials, but don't worry. I delivered the load on time. Nobody would believe me. Worse, they might think I was having mental health issues. In the trucking industry, any sign of psychological problems can end your career. Medical examiners don't mess around. If there was any question about my fitness to drive, I could lose my commercial license. So I kept quiet. I filed my logbook with the required entries. I reported the fuel consumption based on my odometer readings. I didn't mention the 8-minute gap or the missing gallons. Everything looked normal on paper, but I started avoiding I-80 through Nebraska when I could. I take alternate routes, even if they were longer. I tell dispatch I needed to avoid construction zones or that I had delivery time constraints. Any excuse to stay away from mile marker 247. The few times I had to drive that route, I was a nervous wreck. I check my CB radio constantly, making sure it was working. I test my cell phone signal every few minutes. I'd watch the mile markers, obsessively, counting off each one. 245, 246, 147, 248, 149, 150, making sure they were in the right order. Nothing unusual happened on those trips. Normal highway, normal weather, normal radio chatter, just like any other night on I-80. But I was always tense, always watching the sky, always listening for that voice on the CB radio. I installed a dashboard camera in my truck, one that runs continuously, recording everything. If something like that ever happened again, I wanted proof, but the camera never captured anything unusual. Just miles of normal highway, normal traffic, normal night driving. 6 months later, I was talking to another driver at a truck stop in Iowa. Guy named Mike. Been driving for 15 years. Somehow, the conversation turned to strange experiences. On the road, he mentioned seeing weird lights over I-80 in Nebraska a few years back. Said he'd lost radio contact for a few minutes. Couldn't explain it. I asked him where it happened. He thought for a moment, then said, somewhere around mile marker 147, I think. My blood went cold. I asked him to describe what he'd seen. He talked about geometric lights, strange fog, missing time. Not exactly the same as my experience, but close enough to make me realize I wasn't alone. Other drivers had experienced something on that stretch of highway. I started asking around, very carefully. Casual conversations at track stops, CB radio discussions during long drives. I learned that several drivers had stories about I-80 in Nebraska, always between mile markers 145 and 150, always involving lights, fog, radio problems, missing time. None of us talked about it openly. It was always I heard from a guy who knew a driver who, or this happened to a friend of mine. Nobody wanted to put their name on it. Nobody wanted to be the crazy trucker who believed in UFOs. It's been a year now since my encounter. I still drive I-80 through Nebraska when I have to. I still check every mile marker. I still get nervous around mile marker 147. But I've never seen the structure again. Never heard that voice on the CB radio. Never experienced missing time. Sometimes I wonder if it was all in my head. Fatigue, stress, imagination. But then I remember the fuel consumption, the call to my own number, the dashboard camera I installed afterward, the other drivers with similar stories. I don't know what I encountered that night. I don't know if it was extraterrestrial, military, or something else entirely. I don't know why it happened to me, or why it chose that particular stretch of highway, but I know it was real. I know something impossible happened on I-80 near mile marker 147. Something that changed my understanding of the world, of what's possible, of humanity's place in the universe. I still drive trucks. I still haul freight across the country. I still love the open road, the independence, the satisfaction of delivering goods on time. But I'm different now. I pay attention to things I never noticed before. I listen to the CB radio more carefully. I watch the sky more often, and every time I pass mile marker 147, I slow down just a little. I check my mirrors. I make sure my radio is working. I count the seconds until I reach mile marker 248, because somewhere out there, above the highways we drive every day, there are things we don't understand. Things that know our names. Things that can stop time. things that can make trucks move without power. I'm not crazy. I'm not making this up. I'm just a trucker who saw something she shouldn't have seen. On a highway that looked exactly like every other highway. On a night that started out perfectly normal. And if it happened to me, it could happen to anyone. Watch the skies, drivers. Check your mile markers. And if you ever find yourself on I-80 in Nebraska around 2:45 a.m., pay attention to your CB radio. You might hear a voice that knows your name. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 41 years old, and I spent 12 years as a park ranger with the National Park Service. 12 years of getting up at a.m., checking my gear, and driving into some of the most beautiful country in America that night. In September, I was doing my usual evening patrol in Lamar Valley. It was 9:15 p.m., and I was behind the wheel of my 2020 Ford F-150. The truck was set up special for Park Service work, radio equipment, extra batteries, emergency beacon, the works. I'd driven these same roads thousands of times. September is elk season. The bulls were calling to each other across the valley, their voices echoing up the hills. It's loud and wild and beautiful. I was checking for poachers, making sure the last tourists had cleared out, counting the bear activity. Normal stuff. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, 38 degrees, no wind. You could see for miles. The last tourist car had left about 45 minutes. Earlier, I had the whole valley to myself. I liked night shifts. Quiet time to think. Tomorrow was my last day before 3 days off. I was planning to drive down to Bozeman, see my sister, maybe catch a football game. Simple stuff. Every 30 minutes, I had to radio dispatch. Standard check-in, location, status, any incidents. I'd been doing it for so long I could do it in my sleep. The radio crackled with the voices of other rangers scattered across the park. Jim was up by Tower Falls. Sarah was working the south entrance. Normal night. I had my night vision scope on the seat next to me. GPS unit on the dash. Emergency beacon clipped to my vest. Incident report forms in the glove box. Everything I needed to do my job and stay safe. Lamar Valley stretches for miles. Rolling hills covered in grass. Patches of aspen trees. The Lamar River cutting through the middle. I knew every bend in the road, every tree, every rock formation. In 12 years, I'd seen it in every season, every weather condition, every time of day. That's why I noticed when things started going wrong. At 9:30, I reached for my radio to check in with dispatch. The moment I keyed the MIC, static filled the cab. Harsh, crackling static that made my teeth ache. Then it cleared up, like nothing happened. Dispatch, this is Ranger Webb. Sector 7 Patrol. All clear. Copy that, Marcus. Nice and quiet out there. Yes, sir. Just me and the elk. But as I hung up the radio, I realized something was off. The elk weren't making noise anymore. A few minutes ago, the valley was full of bubbling bulls. Now it was dead silent. I pulled over and got out of the truck. The air was cold and still. Too still. I couldn't hear a single animal sound. No owls hooting. No quotes yipping. No insects buzzing. Nothing. In 12 years. I'd never heard Lamar Valley this quiet. I checked my thermometer. The temperature had dropped to 31 degrees. That was a 7-degree drop in 5 minutes. No weather system was moving through. The sky was still clear. My truck's automatic headlights kicked on. That was weird. There was plenty of light from the moon and stars. The sensor shouldn't have triggered. I got back in and checked my GPS. It showed my position correctly, but the topographic overlay was flickering, like the screen was having trouble deciding what to display. I tapped it with my finger. The image stabilized, then I noticed my compass. The needle was swinging back and forth, 15 degrees east and west of north. I'd never seen it do that before. I picked up my night vision scope to check the elk herd. Through the green-tinted view, I could see heat signatures scattered across the valley floor, but they didn't match what I was seeing with my naked eye. The thermal shapes were too big, too bright, in the wrong places. I lowered the scope and looked again. The elk were there, but they were moving. All of them. 200 animals moving in the same direction, like they were following orders. My radio crackled. Not dispatch. This was on the emergency frequency. A voice, clear and calm, gave a set of coordinates. Then silence. I grabbed my notepad and wrote down the numbers. The coordinates were for a spot about 2 miles north of my position, deep in the valley, away from any roads, above me. The sky was doing something impossible. Ribbons of green and blue light were dancing across the stars. It looked like the northern lights, but that was impossible. We were too far south. The aurora doesn't reach Wyoming. I sat in my truck, staring at the lights, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The elk were still moving, flowing across the valley like water. The radio was quiet except for static. My instruments were acting out. Something was very wrong. By 9:45, the elk herd had scattered. All 200 animals had abandoned their feeding area and disappeared into the trees. In breeding season, bulls don't leave territory like that. Not unless something scares them bad. I tried to call dispatch, but every frequency was jammed with interference. Not random static, this was different. The noise had a pattern to it. Like a rhythm, my truck's electrical system started acting up. The headlights dimmed, then brightened. The radio cut out completely, then came back. The dashboard lights flickered. That's when I saw it, above the valley floor, about half a mile away. Lights were moving in a perfect triangle. 3 points of white light, steady and bright, maintaining exact distance from each other. They weren't moving like any aircraft I'd ever seen. No sound, no navigation lights, just 3 lights in formation, gliding across the sky like they were on rails. I reached for my night vision scope. Through the green view, I could see heat signatures on the ground below the lights. But these weren't animals. They were geometric shapes, arranged in a perfect grid pattern. Rectangles and circles, all the same size, scattered across a quarter-mile area. My GPS was going crazy. The altitude reading kept jumping between 7,400 feet and 7,600 feet. I was parked on level ground. The elevation couldn't be changing. Then my emergency beacon started beeping. The little red light was flashing. It had activated itself. I hit the reset button, and it went quiet. Inside the truck, the windows were fogging up. That made no sense. The air was dry, and the heater wasn't running. My engine temperature gauge was rising. The truck was idling, no load, no greater climb. But the needle was moving toward the red zone. That's when my radio crackled. Again. This time, the voice was speaking directly to me. Ranger Webb, maintain position. The voice was calm, professional, like a park supervisor giving orders, but I didn't recognize it, and no one at dispatch knew my exact location. Who is this? I keyed the MIC. Identify yourself. Nothing but static. I looked up at the triangle of lights. They had stopped moving, just hanging in the air, maybe 500 feet above the valley floor. Perfectly still. I grabbed my camera from the equipment box. Professional-grade digital camera, the kind we used for wildlife documentation. I pointed it at the lights and pressed the shutter. The screen showed an error message. Memory card full. That was impossible. I'd loaded a fresh card that morning. 32 gigabytes of storage. I'd taken maybe a dozen photos all day. The lights were getting brighter and bigger. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about the world. The 3 lights weren't separate objects. They were part of something huge. As it got closer, I could make out a dark shape connecting them. A triangle maybe 200 feet across, moving without any sound at all. IT descended into the valley until it was maybe 100 feet above the ground. Then it stopped, just hung there, like it was studying the area. Beams of light shot down from the object. Not random beams, these were focused, like searchlights. They moved across the ground in perfect lines, back and forth, covering every inch of terrain, like it was scanning everything. I tried to photograph it again. The camera turned on, but every picture came out black. The flash wasn't firing. The LCD screen showed nothing but error messages. I reached for my radio. Dead silence on every channel. Even the emergency frequency was quiet. Then every electrical system in my truck shut down. Headlights, radio, GPS, everything. The engine kept running, but all the electronics were dead inside the cab. It was getting hot. The temperature was climbing fast. I could feel sweat on my forehead. My thermometer showed 56 degrees. It had been 31 degrees 10 minutes ago. I looked around the valley, trying to get my bearings, but something was wrong. The hills looked different. The road seemed to curve the wrong way. Trees were in places where I'd never seen trees before. I'd been driving this route for 12 years. I knew every landmark, but now everything looked foreign. The object above me was doing something to the ground. The light beams were moving in patterns, covering the same areas over and over, like it was looking for something. Or maybe recording everything. I sat in my truck, sweating, watching lights that shouldn't exist examine a valley that no longer looked familiar. My radio was dead. My camera was useless. My GPS was showing coordinates that made no sense. I was completely alone. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the object rose into the sky. The lights dimmed, and the dark shape between them became invisible. In seconds, it was gone. The valley looked normal again. The hills were where they should be. The road curved the way I remembered. The trees were back in their proper places, but I was different. Something had changed inside me. My truck's electrical system came back online all at once. Headlights, radio, GPS, everything working perfectly. No fault codes, no error messages. Like nothing had happened. I grabbed my radio and called dispatch. Dispatch, this is Ranger Webb. Sector 7 Patrol. Checking in. Copy that, Marcus. Everything okay out there? We lost contact with you for a few minutes. Lost contact? When? Around 9:45. Your radio went dead. We were about to send someone to check on you. I looked at my watch. It was 10:30. I'd been sitting there for 45 minutes, but it felt like hours. I am fine. Just had some electrical problems. Everything's working now. Copy that. See you in the morning. I checked my GPS log. There was a gap in the tracking data. 23 minutes where the unit had no record of my position. Like I hadn't existed. My emergency beacon showed that it had activated at 9:47 and deactivated at 10:12. No explanation in the system logs. I scrolled through the photos on my camera. They were all normal landscape shots from earlier in the day. No black screens, no error messages, no pictures of lights in the sky. When I got back to headquarters, I filed my incident report. Electrical malfunction in vehicle. Systems restored. No further action required. I didn't mention the lights. I didn't mention the voice on the radio. I didn't mention the 23 minutes of missing time. A week later, I put in for a transfer to a different sector. I told my supervisor I wanted to focus on resource management priorities, desk work, daytime patrols, anything but night shifts in remote areas. I started talking to other rangers carefully. Casual conversations about weird experiences, strange lights, equipment failures, missing time. More than I expected had stories, but none of them had put it in their reports either. We all knew what happened to rangers who filed reports about UFOs. Fitness for duty evaluations, mandatory counseling, early retirement. 2 years later, I was working full-time in the office. I'd requested minimum backcountry patrol duty. I told people I was getting too old for camping and night shifts. They believed me. But the truth was, I couldn't handle being alone in the wilderness anymore. Not after what I'd seen. Not after realizing that we might not be alone out there. I spend my free time now reading reports from other witnesses. Pilots, police officers, military personnel. People who saw things they couldn't explain. People who were changed by the experience. I still work for the Park Service. But I'm not the same person I was before that night in Lamar Valley. I check the sky more often. I pay attention to unusual sounds. I keep my camera ready, even though I know it probably won't work when I need it. Some nights, I wonder if they're still out there, still scanning the valleys, still studying us, still choosing who to contact and who to ignore. I wonder if I'll see them again. Part of me hopes I never do, but another part of me knows that if I do, I'll be ready. I'll try to get proof. I'll try to document what's really happening out there, because someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to understand that we're not alone, and we're not in control. The wilderness is bigger than we thought, and we're not at the top of the food chain anymore. My name is Linda Rodriguez, and I'm the night shift security supervisor here at Valley Regional. It's a 3-for-0-bed facility in suburban Phoenix, and on any given night, we've got about 280 to 290 patients. Tonight, we had 287. I know because I check the sensors every hour during my rounds. I've been doing third shift for all 18 years I've worked here. Some people think it's weird, a 52-year-old woman working nights, but I like the quiet. My kids are grown, I'm divorced, and I own a little condo just 15 minutes away. The night shift pays better, and honestly, after all these years, I know this place better in the dark than most people know their own homes. We had 4 security officers on duty that night. Pretty standard for a midweek in October. The weather was nice clear skies. About 71 degrees, low humidity. Perfect Arizona fall weather. The kind of night where you might actually want to be outside instead of walking these halls. I carry the usual equipment. Radio, keys, incident report tablet. And I know all the emergency procedures by heart. On any given night, we've got 3 nurses per floor, usually 2 residents, and 1 attending physician. The visitor parking lots are empty by this time, and staff parking is about 60% full normal for the night shift. The hospital runs like clockwork at night. Patients sleep, machines beep quietly. and the skeleton crew keeps everything running smooth. I've seen it all over the years. Medical emergencies, confused patients, equipment failures, power outages, you name it, I've dealt with it. I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. The weirdness started small. It always does. I was making my regular rounds when the elevator stopped at the 4th floor without me pressing the button. The doors opened to an empty hallway. I thought maybe someone had called it and then changed their mind. Happens all the time. But then I noticed the patient call lights. They were turning on in sequence, one after another, like dominoes falling. Room 401, 402, 403, all the way down the hall. But when I radioed the nurse's station, they said no requests were coming through. The lights were just lighting up. That's when I first noticed the sound. The HVAC system was running, but it sounded different. The frequency was off, just barely. Like when your car engine doesn't sound quite right. But you can't put your finger on what's wrong. My radio crackled to life. Linda, this is Marcus. Checking in from the problem was, Marcus wasn't scheduled tonight. He was supposed to be off until Friday. Marcus, I don't have you on the schedule, I said into the radio, static. Then nothing. I checked my schedule on the tablet. No Marcus. I tried calling him back, but got no response. The fluorescent lights in the hallway started dimming and brightening in a slow, steady pattern, like the building was breathing. I'd seen electrical problems before, but this was different. It was too organized, too intentional. Down in the emergency department, they were having communication issues with the ambulance service. The backup generator test light came on, even though maintenance wasn't scheduled until next week. In the parking lot, I could see 3 light fixtures flickering in perfect sync. My tablet showed network connectivity issues, then suddenly resolved. Clear signal, like nothing had happened. Then I heard it, the elevator motor running. All the elevators showed stationary on my security display, but I could hear one moving. The mechanical grinding and whirring echoed through the building, but according to every monitor I had, all 4 elevators were sitting still. Something was wrong, really wrong. At 3:47 a.m., every patient monitoring alarm in the hospital went off at once. The sound was deafening. 6 floors of beeping, chirping, and ringing alarms created a symphony of chaos that lasted exactly 30 seconds. Then silence, complete silence. I ran to the nurse's station on the 4th floor. The nurse on duty looked as confused as I felt. What was that? She asked. System glitch, I said. But I didn't believe it. My radio crackled again. This time, it was Officer Johnson from the 2nd floor, but his voice had a strange echo, like he was speaking from inside a tunnel. Linda, are you seeing this shadow pattern in the parking lot? I looked out the window. There, stretched across the asphalt, was a geometric shadow that didn't match any building, tree, or structure around us. It was perfectly symmetrical, like a massive triangle had been drawn in darkness. The emergency lighting system kicked in for exactly 30 seconds, bathing everything in red light, then switched back to normal. My tablet started receiving notifications from user accounts I didn't recognize. Names like Observer 1 and Data Collection Unit 7. That's when the elevator really lost its mind. I watched the floor indicator lights dance across numbers that shouldn't exist. B3, Floor 7, Floor 8. The elevator was traveling to places that weren't there, and I could hear it moving. The cables and motors working overtime. In the parking structure, the lighting was creating impossible geometric configurations. Triangles and diamond shapes made of light that hurt to look at directly. The patterns moved slowly, like they were searching for something. My radio scanner picked up medical helicopter communications from Flagstaff to 100 miles away. Crystal clear, like they were sitting on our roof. The patient room televisions turned on in sequence, floor by floor, but they didn't show any channel. Just blank screens that somehow still glowed. The emergency department called up. 4 different pieces of equipment had malfunctioned in the last 10 minutes. MRI, CT scanner, ultrasound, and one of the crash carts. All different manufacturers, all different systems, all failing at the same time. I knew we were in trouble. I just didn't know how much trouble. At 4:15 a.m., I saw something that shouldn't exist. I was in the parking structure, trying to figure out what was causing the light patterns. When I looked up and saw it, a massive geometric structure hovering about 50 feet above the building. Silent, perfectly still. It was shaped like a triangle, but not flat. 3-dimensional, with surfaces that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. The whole thing was maybe 200 feet across, big enough to cover half the hospital. Light beams came down from it. Not searchlights, something else. Focused beams that seemed to be examining specific areas of the medical facility. They moved with purpose, scanning the emergency department, the ICU, the surgery wing. I grabbed my radio to alert the other officers. Nothing but structured interference, not static structured. Like the sound had been organized into patterns, every information system in the hospital shut down simultaneously. Computer screens went black, then the backup systems kicked in. But even those were acting strange, showing readings that made no sense. The light beams were examining everything. I could see them through the windows, moving from room to room, floor to floor. They lingered on areas with the most patients, the most medical equipment. I watched the patient monitoring equipment from the parking lot. Through the windows, I could see the displays showing coordinated patterns that were impossible. Heart rates, blood pressure, oxygen levels all moving in sync, like every patient in the hospital was connected to the same system. Then I lost time. I remember looking at my watch when the structure first appeared, 4:15 a.m. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the same spot. But my watch read 4:52 a.m. 37 minutes had passed, but it felt like 15. The structure was gone. The light beams were gone. All the systems came back online at exactly the same moment, like someone had thrown a switch. The information systems restored normal operation with no data loss. The radio communications resumed like nothing had happened. The patient monitoring equipment showed no record of the anomalous readings I'd witnessed. I checked the elevator service logs. They showed impossible floor destinations for about 40 minutes, then corrected themselves. B3, Floor 7, Floor 8, all there in the maintenance records, then gone. I submitted an incident report. Facility-wide electrical anomaly systems restored. What else could I say? That we'd been scanned by something that defied everything I knew about reality. The next week, I requested a transfer to day shift. Told them it was family schedule. Changes. I'd worked nights for 18 years. But I couldn't do it anymore. Not after that. I didn't talk about what happened. In a hospital, they have employee assistance programs for staff who are experiencing stress or mental health issues. I didn't want that conversation. But I did reach out to other third-shift supervisors at hospitals around the valley. Turns out, I wasn't alone. Similar reports, but nothing officially documented. Equipment failures, system glitches, missing time. All the same night, I spent hours studying the facility blueprints, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I installed an EMF detector ABP on my phone. Started paying attention to patterns I'd ignored for years. 6 months later, I'm working day. Shift. I volunteer for evening overtime sometimes, but I'm always gone by PM. I've seen too much to pretend that the night shift is just another job. And when medical equipment fails now, when computers glitch or lights flicker, I don't assume it's just a malfunction anymore. Sometimes I look up at the ceiling and wonder if they're still watching, still scanning, still collecting whatever information they came for, because I know now that we're not alone in this building. We're not alone anywhere. They're still out there, and they know exactly where we are. I should have called in sick that Friday night, should have stayed home with Maria and the kids, watched a movie, gone to bed early. Instead, I'm walking the fence line at Biochemical Complex at 1:30 a.m., my radio crackling with routine check-ins, and the distant hum of processing units working through the night. My name is David Santos. I've been security supervisor here for 11 years. 44 years old, married, 3 kids. Own a nice house in Thibodeaux, about 20 minutes south. I know this place better than my own backyard. Every pipe, every building, every sound. The facility makes when it's running right. The biochemical complex covers 340 acres of Louisiana Gulf Coast, processing petrochemicals for everything from plastic bottles to car parts. We run 24/7, 365 days a year. Tonight, we've got 47 operators on shift, normal production levels, everything running smooth as silk. I supervise 6 security officers, and we take our job seriously. This isn't some office building. We're dealing with hazardous materials. Department of Homeland Security clearance. The whole 9 yards. The weather's typical for early April down here. Clear sky, 72 degrees. Humidity thick enough to chew. Light southeast wind carrying the smell of the bio. I've been walking perimeter for 3 hours now, checking access points, monitoring the fence line, making sure everything's secure. It's routine work, but important. One breach, one mistake, and we could have problems that make the evening news. My radio crackles to life. Santos, this is Control. Status report. Perimeter secure. Control. Just finished Zone 7. Heading to Zone 8. Copy that. All systems normal here. I clip the radio back to my belt and check my tablet. The facility monitoring system shows everything green, temperatures normal, pressures within spec, all safety systems online. The incident report. Screen is blank, which is how I like it. 11 years doing this job, and I can count the real emergencies on one hand. The facility stretches out in front of me. A maze of pipes and tanks and processing units lit up like a small city. Steam rises from cooling towers, creating ghostly columns in the humid air. The sounds are familiar: compressors cycling, pumps running, the steady whir of ventilation systems. It's industrial music, and after 11 years, it's almost comforting. I've got my routine down to a science. Each zone takes about 20 minutes to check properly. I look for signs of tampering, check the fence integrity, make sure the access gates are secure. The company takes security seriously. We've got cameras, motion sensors, and enough lighting to make this place visible from space. But nothing beats having someone actually walk the line, using their eyes and ears. My wife, Maria, always asks if I get scared out here at night. Truth is, I don't. This is my workplace, my responsibility. I know every sound, every shadow, every piece of equipment. When something's not right, I notice it immediately. That's what they pay me for. The perimeter road is smooth beneath my feet. As I walk towards Zone 8, my flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, checking the fence line every few yards. The chain link is topped with razor wire, and we've got sensors every 100 feet. If anyone tries to climb this fence, we'll know about it in the control room within seconds. I stop at checkpoint 8 Alpha and scan my ID badge. The electronic reader beeps twice, confirming my presence. Everything's working like clockwork. In 6 more hours, the day shift will take over, and I'll head home to Mary and the kids. Just another quiet night at biochemical at least. That's what I thought. The first sign something was wrong came at 1:47 a.m. I was approaching the northeast corner of Zone 8 when my radio erupted in static. Not the usual brief crackle. This was a harsh, structured interference that made me wince and reach for the volume control. Then, just as suddenly, it cleared. Santos, did you copy that last transmission? Control's voice came through crystal clear. Negative, Control. Just got static on my end. We're showing normal communications here. Must be atmospheric interference. I shrugged it off. Radio problems happen, especially down here in the bay with all the humidity and electrical activity from the facility. But as I continued walking, I noticed something else. The facility lighting seemed to fluctuate slightly, not enough to trigger any alarms, but noticeable if you knew what to look for. I stopped and pulled out my tablet to check the electrical monitoring system. Everything showed normal. Main power steady, backup systems on standby. All distribution panels within normal parameters, but I could swear I saw the lights dip for just a moment. Then I noticed the temperature reading on my tablet. Zone 8 normally runs between 74 and 76 degrees ambient. The display showed 70 degrees, then flickered to 74, then back to 70. A 4-degree variation in a temperature-controlled environment was unusual, but not unheard of. Still, I made a note to have maintenance check the HVAC sensors in the morning. The tablet's network connectivity icon blinked red, then green, then red again. I waited a few seconds, and it stabilized on green. Glitchy night, I muttered, and kept walking. That's when I realized how quiet it was. I'd been walking this perimeter for 11 years, and I knew the facility's rhythm like a heartbeat. There should have been the steady hum of compressors, the whir of cooling systems, the distant rumble of the main processing units. Instead, there was an odd silence that made my skin prickle. I stopped walking and listened carefully. The sounds were still there, but they seemed muted, like someone had turned down the volume on the entire facility. It was subtle enough that I might have imagined it, but obvious enough to make me check my watch. 1:52 a.m. Nothing scheduled that would account for reduced operations. The emergency lighting system suddenly activated, bathing the area in harsh white light. I froze, waiting for the alarm klaxons, but they never came. After about 10 seconds, the emergency lights shut off, and the normal perimeter lighting resumed. I keyed my radio. Control, this is Santos. I just saw the emergency lighting system activate in Zone 8. You showing anything on your boards? Negative, Santos. All systems showing normal here. No emergency lighting activation recorded. I stared at the light fixtures. above me. They looked normal now, but I knew what I'd seen. Emergency lighting doesn't activate without a trigger, either a power loss, a manual activation, or a system malfunction, and Control would have records of any of those events. My tablet beeped, and I looked down to see the digital monitoring displays flicker momentarily. The reading showed normal, then jumped to impossible values: temperatures of 200 degrees, pressures that would have blown every safety valve in the facility, then returned to normal. Control, are you seeing any anomalous readings on the monitoring system? Negative, Santos. Everything's green across the board. I walked over to the nearest monitoring station, a weatherproof box containing temperature and pressure sensors. For this zone, the digital display showed normal readings, but as I watched, the numbers flickered briefly, showing the same impossible values I'd seen on my tablet. Then my radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't static. It was a voice, clear and professional, saying, "Tower, this is November 77 Alpha, requesting approach instructions." I knew every radio frequency used by the facility, and we didn't have any aircraft operations. The nearest airport was 30 miles away, and commercial flights didn't use our frequency range. I tried to respond, but the transmission cut off before I could key the mic data. As I continued walking, I noticed the perimeter lighting beginning to behave strangely. 3 fixtures in a row would dim simultaneously, then brighten, then return to normal. It happened in a pattern: first the 3 on my left, then the 3 ahead of me, then the 3 on my right. Like the lights were following my movement. I stopped walking, and the light pattern stopped. I took a few steps forward, and it resumed. The lights were definitely responding to my presence, but that was impossible. Our perimeter lighting system was simple fixed fixtures on a basic timer system. There was no motion activation, no automated brightness control from somewhere in the facility. I heard a pump motor kick on. That shouldn't have been unusual, except I knew that particular pump was scheduled to be in standby mode until morning. The sound was distinctive, a low, rhythmic thrumming that carried across the complex. I checked my tablet again. The pump status showed standby, but I could clearly hear it running. Either the monitoring system was wrong, or the pump was operating without being commanded to do so. I was starting to feel uneasy in a way I couldn't quite explain. 11 years of security work, and I'd never experienced anything like this. Individual system glitches were one thing, but multiple anomalies across different systems, that was concerning. I picked up my pace, eager to complete the perimeter check and get back to the main security office where I could review the monitoring systems more carefully. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The facility felt different somehow, familiar, but wrong. Like walking through your own house in the dark and finding furniture moved just slightly from where you expected it to be. I had no idea it was about to get much worse. At 2:03 a.m., every alarm in the facility went off at once. The sound was deafening: fire alarms, chemical leak warnings, evacuation signals, and emergency shutdown alerts, all screaming simultaneously. I covered my ears and ran toward the nearest emergency communication station, expecting to see chaos in the control room, expecting to hear evacuation orders over the pass system. Then, just as suddenly as they'd started, all the alarms stopped. Complete silence. Not even the normal background hum of the facility. I keyed my radio with shaking hands. "Control, this is Santos. What's the status on those alarms?" "Santos, what alarms?" "We're showing all normal here. The facility-wide alarm activation. Every system just went off." "Negative, Santos. We have no alarm activations on our boards. All systems are green." I stared at the radio, my heart pounding. That was impossible. I'd just heard dozens of alarms, loud enough to wake the dead. There was no way Control hadn't heard them too. "Control, I need you to verify that all alarm systems are functioning properly. Run a diagnostic on the emergency notification system. Stand by, Santos." While I waited, I noticed something strange happening with the radio communications between officers. When Jimmy Chin checked in from Zone 3, his voice had an odd echo effect, like he was speaking from inside a metal container. When Rebecca Torres reported from Zone 12, her transmission seemed to overlap with itself, creating a disturbing double voice effect. "Santos, this is Control. Diagnostic complete. All alarm systems are functioning normally. No activations recorded." I was about to respond when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were shadows on the massive storage tanks in front of me, geometric patterns that didn't match any structures in the facility. Perfect triangles and hexagons, sharp-edged and precise, projected onto the curved metal surfaces. I turned around, looking for the light source that could be creating these shadows. The perimeter lighting was standard simple fixtures that cast broad, diffused light. There was nothing that could create such precise geometric patterns. I pulled up my tablet to document what I was seeing, but the electrical monitoring system was showing impossible readings. Distribution panels were indicating loads of 150% when the maximum saved load was 80%. Transformers were showing temperatures of 400 degrees when they should have been around 100. Yet everything in the facility was operating normally. The tablet's facility database was showing information that didn't exist. Sensor readings from locations that weren't in our system. Equipment status reports from units that had been decommissioned years ago. Data streams from other facilities places I'd never heard of, with identification codes that didn't match any standard format. I tried to screenshot the anomalous data, but every time I pressed the capture button, the screen would flicker and return to normal readings. It was like the system was actively preventing me from documenting what I was seeing. The perimeter lighting began creating new patterns, not random dimming and brightening, but organized sequences that moved across the facility like a wave, starting from the northeast corner and flowing toward the southwest. Each light would dim, then brighten, then dim again, creating a visual rhythm that was almost hypnotic. My radio scanner, which normally picked up local emergency services and aircraft traffic, was receiving communications from facilities hundreds of miles away. Crystal clear transmissions from chemical plants in Texas, oil refineries in Mississippi, nuclear facilities in Alabama, all reporting normal operations, all using identification codes that didn't match any database I knew. Then I heard the equipment starting up. Pumps that should have been in standby mode began running in sequence. First the cooling water pumps, then the process circulation pumps, then the emergency fire suppression pumps. Each one activated exactly 30 seconds after the previous one, creating a mechanical rhythm that echoed across the facility. I checked my tablet frantically. Every pump showed standby status, but I could hear them running. The sound was unmistakable though. Deep, rhythmic thrumming of industrial machinery operating at full capacity. Emergency backup systems began activating without any corresponding primary system failures. Backup power systems came online while main power was stable. Emergency ventilation systems started running while the primary HVAC showed normal operation. Backup communication systems activated while primary communications were functioning perfectly. It was like the facility was preparing for some kind of emergency that hadn't happened yet. I was standing near the main processing unit when I saw it, a massive geometric structure, perhaps 100 feet across, hovering silently above the facility. It was triangular, with perfectly straight edges and a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No sound, no visible means of propulsion, just hanging in the air about 300 feet above the processing units. I stood there, mouth open, staring at something that shouldn't exist. My mind raced through possibilities: military aircraft, experimental, drone, some kind of weather phenomenon, but nothing fit. The object was too large, too silent, too perfectly geometric to be anything conventional. I fumbled for my radio, but when I keyed the mic, all I got was structured interference, not random static, but organized patterns of sound that almost seemed like communication. Like someone was trying to send a message using our radio frequency. The facility's information systems suddenly shut down. Every display screen went dark. Every monitoring station went offline. Every computer terminal showed nothing but blank screens. Then, one by one, the backup systems activated, bringing everything back online, but the data was different. The readings were normal, but there were subtle changes, timestamps that didn't match, serial numbers that were different by 1 or 2 digits, sensor locations that had shifted slightly in the database. The structure above the facility began projecting focused beams of light downward, scanning specific areas of the chemical infrastructure. The beams moved with purpose, examining the storage tanks, the processing units, the emergency systems, like something was conducting a detailed inspection of our facility. I tried to call control again, but my radio would only produce that strange structured interference. I was completely cut off from communication, standing alone in the middle of a 3-4-acre facility, watching something impossible happen above my head. The light beams seemed to be taking measurements, analyzing the facility's layout and operation. They moved from system to system with an intelligence that was both fascinating and terrifying. Whatever was up, they knew exactly what it was looking at. Then the process monitoring equipment began showing coordinated readings that defied physics. Temperatures that should have been impossible. Pressures that should have destroyed every piece of equipment in the facility. Flow rates that violated the laws of thermodynamics. Yet everything continued operating normally. I checked my watch. 2:28 a.m. The encounter had lasted about 25 minutes. But when I looked at my tablet, the security system showed that I'd been in Zone 8 for 48 minutes. Somehow, I'd lost time or time had lost me. The structure began to ascend, rising silently into the night sky. The light being shut off, the equipment stopped its synchronized startup sequence, and the facility settled back into its normal rhythm. Within minutes, the massive geometric object had disappeared beyond visual range, leaving no trace of its presence. All systems returned to normal operation simultaneously. The impossible readings vanished. The anomalous data stream stopped, and the facility monitoring system showed exactly what they should have shown all along. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The thing that haunts me most isn't what I saw, it's what I felt when those light beams touched me. I was standing near the main processing unit, still trying to process what I'd witnessed, when one of the scanning beams swept across my position. The moment it made contact, every nerve in my body went numb. Not painful, just absent, like someone had disconnected my nervous system from my brain. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink, but I could think, and I could see. And what I saw changed everything I thought I knew about the world. The beam wasn't just light, it was information. Data flowing through me, around me, examining every cell in my body with clinical precision. I felt it cataloging my DNA, measuring my bone density, analyzing my brain chemistry. But it wasn't invasive in the way a medical examination would be. It was more like being scanned by something that considered me a specimen. Then came the communication, not words, not voices, but concepts appearing directly in my mind. Images and ideas that bypassed my ears and eyes and planted themselves in my consciousness. The facility around me became transparent, and I could see its purpose from a perspective that wasn't human. The chemical plant wasn't just processing petrochemicals. It was part of a network, hundreds of similar facilities across the globe, all connected by invisible threads of information and purpose. I saw the flow of materials and energy between them, saw how they fit into patterns too large for any single human mind to grasp, and I saw what was watching us. They weren't visitors. In the way science fiction movies portrayed aliens, they were researchers, and Earth was their laboratory. The facility, the infrastructure, the entire industrial civilization, all of it was part of an ongoing experiment that had been running for decades. I understood, in that moment of forced clarity, that humanity's technological development hadn't been entirely our own. Key innovations, crucial discoveries, strategic resource placement, all subtly influenced by intelligences that viewed as the way we might view bacteria in a petri dish. The beam intensified, and I felt something being taken from me, not physically, but mentally. Memories, experiences, knowledge, all being copied, analyzed, filed away in some vast database. I was being documented, catalogued, added to their collection of human specimens. But worse than the violation was the indifference. There was no malice in what they were doing, no evil intent, just the same clinical detachment a scientist might feel when studying insects. We weren't enemies to be conquered, we were subjects to be observed. The facility around me began to change. The processing units became transparent, revealing their true purpose. They weren't just making chemicals, they were producing compounds that affected human behavior, human development, human evolution, trace elements that would be incorporated into everyday products, subtle influences that would shape our species. Over generations, I saw the other facilities in the network, power plants that did more than generate electricity, water treatment plants that added more than they removed, pharmaceutical factories that produced compounds never listed on any ingredient label, all of it orchestrated by minds that thought in terms of centuries and millennia. Then I saw myself as they saw me. Not David Santos, security supervisor, husband and father, just specimen 4, 847, to 91, a collection of data points, genetic markers, behavioral patterns, my entire life, everything I thought made me unique, reduced to entries in a database. The beam released me, and I collapsed to my knees. gasping for air I didn't remember needing. The facility returned to normal appearance, but I could still feel the echo of that alien perspective in my mind. The knowledge of what I'd seen burned like acid in my consciousness. I looked up at the geometric structure, now beginning its silent ascent, and felt a terror deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. Not the fear of death, the fear of insignificance. The realization that humanity's entire existence was just one small part of someone else's experiment. My radio crackled back to life, and I heard Control's voice, normal and professional. Santar's status report. I stared at the radio, then at the ascending structure, then at the facility around me. How could I explain what I just experienced? How could I put into words the violation of having my mind read, my memories copied, my entire species revealed? As laboratory subjects. Santos, please respond. Are you all right? I keyed the mic with shaking hands. I'm here, Control. All clear in Zone 8. Copy that. You sound a little shaken up. Everything okay? I looked up at the night sky, where the structure had disappeared without a trace. Just tired, Control. Log night. Understood? One more zone to check. Then you can head back to base. I clipped the radio to my belt and stood up, my legs unsteady. The facility looked exactly as it had before, the same pipes, the same tanks, the same processing units. But now I knew what they really were. Now I understood that nothing was what it seemed. I walked towards Zone 9, my mind reeling from what I'd experienced. The worst part wasn't the violation or the terror, it was the knowledge that I was completely alone with this information. No one would believe me. No one could believe me. The truth was too vast, too impossible, too threatening to the comfortable illusions that kept society functioning. As I walked, I noticed that my tablet was working perfectly again. All systems showed normal. All readings were within specification. All data was exactly what it should be. But I could feel the echo of those other readings, the ones that had revealed the true nature of the facility. I completed the perimeter check in mechanical silence, following procedures that now seemed laughably inadequate. How do you secure a facility against something that can manipulate matter and energy at will? How do you protect infrastructure that's already been compromised at the deepest level? By the time I reached the main security office, I had made a decision. I would write my report, submit it through proper channels, and request a transfer to day shift. I would go home to Maria and the kids, and I would never speak of what I had seen, but I would never forget. And I would never again look at the night sky without wondering what was looking back. The hardest part about living with impossible knowledge is pretending that everything is normal. I filed my incident report at 6:47 a.m. just before the day shift arrived. Facility-wide electrical anomaly. Duration approximately 45 minutes. All systems restored to normal operation. Clean, simple, bureaucratic language that said nothing and everything. My supervisor, Frank Morrison, read it over while sipping his coffee. Power company giving us trouble again. Something like that, I said, which was true enough. The power company was giving us trouble. It just wasn't the kind of trouble that Frank could understand. I submitted my transfer request the following Monday. Family schedule requirements, I wrote, which was also true. I needed to be home with Mary and the kids. I needed to be around people who still believed the world made sense. 3 weeks later, I was working day shift, AM to PM, dealing with delivery schedules and contractor access instead of walking the perimeter alone in the dark. The pay was the same. The work was easier, and nobody questioned why an 11-year veteran had suddenly requested a change. But normal life felt like wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. I would catch myself staring at the processing units, remembering what I'd seen when they became transparent. I would watch the delivery trucks arrive with raw materials and wonder what else they might be carrying. I would review the daily production reports and look for patterns that might indicate the facility's true purpose. Maria noticed the change. Immediately. You're different since you switched shifts, she said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the kids play. More distant. Are you feeling okay? How do you tell your wife that you've learned humanity is part of an experiment? How do you explain that the industrial civilization we depend on is controlled by intelligences that view us as laboratory subjects? Just adjusting to the new schedule, I said, which was a lie wrapped around a truth. I was adjusting to living in a world where nothing was what it seemed. The knowledge changed everything. I found myself studying the news differently, looking for patterns that might indicate outside influence. I watched the stock market and wondered if the fluctuations were natural or manipulated. I read about new technological developments and questioned whether they were human innovations or subtle gifts from our observers. Sleep became difficult. When I closed my eyes, I would see the geometric structure hovering above the facility, its light beam scanning and analyzing. I would feel the echo of that alien perspective, the clinical detachment with which they viewed our entire species. I tried to research what I'd experienced, but carefully. I read about UFO sightings, about government projects, about industrial espionage. I found stories that were similar to mine: security guards, maintenance workers, facility operators who had seen things they couldn't explain. But their accounts were always dismissed as stress, fatigue, or attention-seeking. The smart ones, I realized, kept quiet. Like me, 6 months later, I was offered a promotion to security manager at a new facility being built in Texas. Better pay, better benefits, a chance to advance my career. I turned it down without hesitation. I don't understand, Frank said when I declined. This is exactly the kind of opportunity you've been working toward. I like it here, I said, which was both true and false. I didn't like it here, I was terrified of it. But I understood it. I knew what to watch for, what to expect. A new facility might have new surprises, new revelations I wasn't ready to handle. I kept working day shift, kept filing my reports, kept pretending that the world made sense. But I also kept watching. I noted the patterns in the facility's operation, the subtle changes in procedures, the new compounds being produced. I documented everything, not in any official capacity, but in encrypted files on my personal computer. Maybe someday I would need that information. Maybe someday someone would ask the right questions, and I would have the right answers. Maria still worries about me. The kids still think I'm just their dad who works at the chemical plant. My coworkers still see me as David Santos, reliable security supervisor, 11 years of steady service. But I know what I really am. I'm specimen number 4,847,291. Carrying knowledge that was never meant for human minds. I'm a witness to humanity's true place in the cosmic order, not masters of our own destiny, but subjects in an experiment we don't even know we're part of. And every night, when I drive home from the facility, I scan the sky for geometric shadows that shouldn't exist, because I know they're up there, watching, analyzing, documenting. And I know that what I experienced that Friday night in April was just the beginning. The experiment continues, the observers remain, and somewhere in a database beyond human comprehension. My memories are filed away with millions of others, waiting for the day when they might be needed. I just hope that day never comes, but I suspect it will. I still check my fuel gauge twice every shift. My supervisor thinks it's some weird habit, but I know better. You don't lose 2 gallons of diesel in 6 minutes without going somewhere, and I went somewhere that Tuesday in December. Problem is, I can't prove it. My name's Tommy Castellano. I've been driving for up 3 years now. Same route through the mountains of Pennsylvania. Route 6 corridor, they call it. Nothing fancy, just farms and houses scattered between the trees. Good people, honest work, and a paycheck that helps me get through community college. Tuesday, December 12th started like any other day. I clocked in at 8:30 a.m. Loaded package car 47 with 127 stops. That's my truck, a 2018 model with 180,000 miles on it. She runs good, burns diesel steady, and knows these roads as well as I do. Peak season was hitting hard. Christmas packages everywhere. My supervisor, Mike, handed me the route sheet and said, "Tommy, you're looking at 10.5 hours today. Maybe more if the weather turns." I nodded. Overtime was overtime, and I needed every dollar for tuition. The truck loaded easy. Mostly Christmas orders, toys, electronics, clothes. Nothing weird, nothing dangerous. Just regular people buying. Regular stuff for regular holidays. I did my safety check. Tires at 80 psi. Oil level good. Def fluid topped off. Everything by the book. Mountain View District was my territory. 3 years of driving the same roads, delivering to the same people. I knew every pothole, every tight turn, every house where the dog barks. Mrs. Peterson always had cookies ready. Old Man Hendricks always wanted to chat about his corn crop. Good people. The weather looked okay that morning. Cold, maybe 28 degrees, but clear. The radio said light snow might come later, but nothing that would shut down the roads. I'd driven through worse. I had my routine down perfect. Start with the heavy stuff in town, work my way out to the rural boxes, finish with the apartments back in town. Efficient, clean, the kind of route planning that kept me on Mike's good side. My girlfriend Sarah was meeting me for dinner at PM. We'd been together 2 years, and she understood the job. Sometimes I ran late during peak season. She'd wait, but I always called if I was going to be more than 30 minutes behind schedule. The first half of the route went smooth. Made good time in town. Got the heavy packages delivered early. By PM, I was heading out to the farms. That's where the money was. Rural deliveries paid better, and I liked the quiet roads. I remember thinking about my night class. Intro to Business Management. Had a test Thursday, needed to study. Professor Martinez was tough but fair. If you did the work, you passed. If you didn't, you failed. Simple as that. The truck ran perfect that morning. No warning lights, no strange noises. The engine hummed at exactly 1,850 revolutions per minute at cruising speed. The transmission shifted smooth. Everything felt right. BYPM. I had 23 deliveries left. All rural stuff: Miller Road, Hendricks Farm, Peterson Place. Bunch of mailbox stops. Easy work if you knew the roads, and I knew these roads better than anybody. I was driving down Miller Road at 4:23 p.m. when the GPS did something it had never done before. It recalculated my route without me asking. Same roads, same stops, but it beeped and showed route updated on the screen. Weird, but not worth stopping for. Miller Road cuts through 6 miles of nothing. No houses, no farms, just trees and fields. The kind of road where you might see a deer or hawk, but not much else. Good road for thinking. That's when I noticed the quiet. I mean really quiet. Usually, you hear something out there: a tractor running, cows making noise, somebody's dog barking. But today, nothing, just my engine and the wind. I reached for my radio to check in with dispatch. Standard procedure every 2 hours. But all I got was static. That was strange. Coverage was usually good out here. Cell towers weren't far away. The dashboard clock read 4:31 p.m. But something felt off about the light. It looked more like 5:30 or 6 o'clock. The grey light you get before dark. But it was December, so maybe that was normal. Days get short fast in winter. My headlights kicked on automatically. The truck has sensors that turn them on when it gets dark. But it wasn't dark. Overcast, sure, but not dark. I checked the settings. Everything was normal. The engine RPM started jumping around. Nothing major, just little fluctuations. 1,850 to 1,900, then back down. The truck ran fine, but the needle kept moving. I made a mental note to mention it to the mechanic. I hadn't seen another car for 20 minutes. That wasn't normal for Miller Road. It's not a highway, but it's not empty either. Farmers use it. Delivery trucks, people driving to work. But today, nothing. The tire pressure monitor beeped once. All the tires showed normal pressure. Then the light went off. Electronic glitch, probably. These trucks had lots of sensors, and they acted up sometimes. I tried the radio again. This time it started spinning frequencies by itself. FM, AM, CB channels, all static. Every single one. That definitely wasn't normal. I'd never seen it do that before. Then I saw the fog dot. IT wasn't there a minute ago. I'm sure of it. But ahead of me, maybe half a mile down the road, was a wall of fog. Thick, white, and perfectly straight across the road. Like someone had drawn a line and said fog starts here. Weather in the mountains can change fast. Fog rolls in from valleys, especially in winter. But this fog looked different. Too neat, too organized. Real fog is messy, uneven. This fog looked like it was waiting for something. I slowed down to 35 miles per hour. Company policy in low visibility. Safety first, always. But something about this fog made me nervous. I'd driven through plenty of fog before, but never fog that looked like this. The radio crackled once, then went dead. Not static dead, completely dead. Like someone had pulled the plug. I checked the power button, checked the connections. Everything looked fine, but the radio was silent. My cell phone showed 1 bar, then emergency only. That was impossible. I had full coverage on Miller Road, always had. I'd made calls from this exact spot before. The fog was getting closer, maybe a quarter mile now. I could see it moving, rolling toward me like a slow wave. But there was no wind. The trees weren't moving. How does fog move without wind? I thought about turning around, but that would mean driving back to town, explaining to Mike why I couldn't finish my route. Plus, I'd driven through worse weather than this. Just fog, nothing to worry about. The speedometer read 45 miles per hour. But it felt like I was going faster, or slower. Hard to tell. Sometimes when you're tired, your brain plays tricks on you. I'd been driving for 7 hours. Maybe I needed coffee. But I wasn't tired. I was wide awake. more awake than I'd been all day. Like my body knew something was coming, even if my brain didn't want to admit it. The fork was right in front of me now. I could see where it started, a perfect line across the road. No fade in, no gradual thickening, just clear air, then fog. That's not how fog works. I took a deep breath and drove in. The fog swallowed my truck whole. 1 second, I could see the road ahead. The next second, I couldn't see past my front bumper. But here's the weird part, my windshield stayed dry. Usually, fog means moisture, water droplets on the glass, wipers working. But my windshield was burnt dry. The speedometer still read 45 miles per hour. But I couldn't feel the road underneath me. You know how you can sense the track moving, feel the little bumps and vibrations. That was gone. Like I was floating instead of driving. I should have been scared. Should have stopped right there. But I kept going. The fork was thick, but it wasn't cold. The temperature gauge showed normal. The heater worked fine. Everything seemed normal except for the fact that I couldn't see anything. My headlights were useless. They just bounced off the fog and came back at me. High beams, low beams. Did it matter? The light went maybe 3 feet before it hit that white wall and stopped. The GPS screen went crazy. I could see my track icon, but the road overlay disappeared. Just a blank screen with a blue dot showing where I was supposed to be. But where was I? Then I heard the engine temperature alarm. Not the gauge, the actual beeping alarm. I looked at the dashboard. Engine temp was 12 degrees higher than normal. Not dangerous, but definitely not right. The truck wasn't working any harder than usual. The radio came back to life, but instead of dispatch, I heard voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Not Spanish, not any language I'd ever heard. The voices were calm, professional, like people doing their jobs. The fog started to change. Instead of random swirls, it formed shapes, geometric patterns, perfect circles and straight lines. Fog doesn't do that. Fog is chaos, not geometry. My stability control kicked in. That's the system that helps keep the truck straight if you hit ice or lose traction. But I was driving straight. I hadn't turned the wheel. Why would stability control activate? I tried to slow down, but the brake pedal felt strange. Soft, like it was pushing through mud. The truck slowed down, but not because of the brakes. It slowed down because something wanted it to slow down. The cell phone in my pocket was getting warm. Not hot, just warm, like it was working harder than usual. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Emergency only was flashing, but underneath, I could see text messages. Messages I didn't remember sending. Then I saw the lights. They weren't headlights. They weren't street lights. They were something else entirely. Bright white lights that seemed to float in the fog. They moved in patterns that hurt to look at. Up, down, sideways, diagonal. Movements that made no sense. The fog started to thin out. Not gradually, all at once. Like someone had turned off a machine. 1 second, I couldn't see anything. The next second, I could see everything. But it was all wrong. The road looked like Miller Road. But it wasn't Miller Road. The trees were in the wrong places. The fence posts were different. Even the road surface looked newer, like it had been repaved, and spanning the road ahead of me, maybe 100 feet away, was something that shouldn't exist. It was big, bigger than any bridge I'd ever seen. It looked like metal, but not any metal I recognized. The surface was smooth, but somehow reflected light in impossible ways. Like looking at water that's been turned into steel, the structure was perfectly silent. My truck engine was running, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I couldn't hear anything, not the wind, not the tires on the road, not even my own breathing. I tried to stop. I really tried. I pushed the brake pedal all the way to the floor, but the truck kept moving forward. Not fast, but steady. Like something was pulling me toward that thing. The radio crackled again. This time the voice was clear, speaking English. Delivery in progress. That's when I knew I was in trouble. The truck rolled under the structure, and every electrical system shut down. Dashboard went black. Headlights died. Radio went silent. But the engine kept running. That's impossible. The engine needs electricity to run, needs computers to control the fuel injection. But it kept running anyway. The temperature inside the cab dropped fast. I could see my breath in the air. The heater was off, but this wasn't normal cold. This was the kind of cold that comes from somewhere else, somewhere far away. I tried to look up through the windshield to see what was above me, but all I could see was smooth metal. It stretched from one side of the road to the other, maybe 50 feet above my head. No bolts, no seams, no signs of how it was built. Just perfect, impossible metal. The truck came to a stop directly under the center of the structure. I didn't brake. I didn't turn off the engine. It just stopped. Like someone had pressed a pause button on the whole world. That's when I realized I couldn't move. Not paralyzed. I could still breathe. Still blink. Still think. But I couldn't move my arms or legs. I was stuck in the driver's seat like I was glued there. My hands were on the steering wheel. And that's where they stayed. The silence was complete. I couldn't hear my heartbeat. Couldn't hear my breathing. The world had been turned off. And I was the only thing left running. Then something touched my mind. Not physically. I didn't feel hands on my head or anything like that. But something was inside my thoughts. Looking around. It felt like having a stranger rifle through your personal belongings while you watched. Invasive and wrong. I tried to resist. Tried to push whatever it was out of my head. But it was too strong. It moved through my memories like it was reading a book. My childhood. My job. My girlfriend Sarah. My plans for the future. All of it examined and catalogued by something that wasn't human. The voice came back, but not through the radio. It came from inside my head. Delivery confirmed. Package retrieved. Subject suitable for monitoring. Package? What package? I had packages in the back of the truck, but they were just Christmas presents. Toys and clothes and electronics. Nothing important enough for whatever this was. But then I understood. I was the package. I was what was being delivered. The cold got worse. I could feel ice crystals forming on my eyelashes. My breath came out in white puffs that hung in the air longer than they should have. The windows started to fog up, but the fog formed patterns, geometric shapes that looked almost like writing. Time moved strangely. I felt like I was sitting there for hours, but the dashboard clock hadn't moved. It was still 4:37 p.m., the same time it had been when I entered the fog. Something was taking pictures. I couldn't see a camera, couldn't see any equipment. But I could feel the attention, like bright lights scanning every inch of my body. It felt like being examined by a doctor, but the doctor was invisible, and the examination was happening without any tools. My phone was buzzing in my pocket, text messages coming in one after another, but I couldn't move to check them. Later, I would find out they were messages I had sent to myself. Messages in my own handwriting, but saying things I would never say. The presence in my mind was leaving. I could feel it pulling away, taking copies of my memories with it, like someone photocopying files before putting them back in the cabinet. I was still me, but I was also something else now. Tagged, marked, catalogued. The electrical systems came back online all at once. Dashboard lights, headlights, radio, everything normal. The engine settled back into its regular rhythm. The temperature, gauge read normal. All systems green. I could move again. I flexed my fingers, rolled my shoulders. Everything worked fine. Like nothing had happened, but something had happened. I could feel it in my bones. I was different now. Not obviously different. I looked the same in the mirror. Sounded the same when I spoke. But deep down, where it mattered, I was changed. The truck started rolling forward again. I didn't press the gas pedal. I didn't take my foot off the brake. But we were moving, passing out from under the structure and back onto the normal road dotted. My rearview mirror, I saw the structure disappearing. Not fading away, just disappearing. Like it had never been there at all. 1 second it was there. The next second it was gone. The fog was gone too. Clear skies, normal daylight. Miller Road looked exactly like it always had. Bright trees, bright fence posts, bright road surface. Like the last 10 minutes had been a dream. But it wasn't a dream. The fuel gauge proved that. I pulled over at the next wide spot and checked everything. The GPS showed I was exactly where I should be on Miller Road. The time was 4:43 p.m. Only 6 minutes had passed since I entered the fog, but the fuel gauge showed I was 2 gallons lower than I should be. I'd been tracking my fuel consumption all day part of the job. I knew exactly how much diesel I should have left, but I was missing 2 gallons. You don't burn 2 gallons of diesel in 6 minutes of normal driving. Not even close. Those 2 gallons were proof that I'd gone somewhere. Somewhere that used more fuel than driving down Miller Road. I tried the radio. Dispatch came through clear and strong. Car 47. This is base. Everything okay out there? Yeah. Just checking in. Making good time. Copy that. See you back at the facility. Normal conversation. Professional. Like nothing had happened. But I hadn't been in contact with dispatch for 20 minutes. Why weren't they worried? I finished the route without any more problems. Delivered the packages. Collected the signatures. Followed all the procedures. The customers were friendly, normal. Mrs. Peterson offered me cookies. Old man Hendricks wanted to talk about his corn crop. Everything exactly like it always was. Back at the facility, I filed my delivery report. All packages delivered. No problems. No incidents. I didn't mention the fork or the structure or the missing fuel. What would I say? That I'd been abducted by aliens? That I'd lost 2 gallons of diesel in 6 minutes? I talked to the mechanic about the truck. How's 47 running? He asked. Good. Engine temperature spiked a little this afternoon, but it's back to normal now. He ran a diagnostic check. No fault codes, no error messages. Everything perfect. Like the truck had never experienced any problems at all. I went home and tried to act normal. Sarah was waiting for me at the restaurant. We had dinner, talked about our day. I told her about the heavy package load, the overtime, the weather. Normal stuff. I didn't mention the fog that night. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those 2 gallons of diesel. I got up at M and went online. Searched for UFO reports, alien abduction stories, missing time experiences. I found hundreds of them. People who had lost minutes or hours, who couldn't account for fuel consumption, who had strange experiences they couldn't explain. I installed an EMF detector app on my phone. Bought a digital voice recorder. Started carrying a camera in my truck. If it happened again, I wanted evidence. But it never happened again. I finished out peak season without any more incidents. After Christmas, I requested a transfer to a different route. Told Mike I wanted to try something new. Maybe get some urban experience. He approved the transfer. Now I deliver in town. Mostly office buildings and apartments. No rural roads. No long stretches of empty highway. Lots of traffic. Lots of witnesses. Lots of people around. I still drive by Miller Road sometimes. It looks normal. Trees, fields, fence posts. Nothing strange about it. But I never drive down it anymore. Never deliver to those farms. The Peterson family moved away in January. Old man Hendricks sold his farm in March. New people live there now. People who don't know about the fog, about the structure, about what happened on that Tuesday in December. I still check my fuel gauge twice every shift. Still carry that voice recorder. Still wonder what happened to those 2 gallons of diesel. Sometimes I wake up at night and find text messages on my phone. Messages I sent but don't remember sending. They're always simple. Delivery complete. Package received. Subject compliant. I delete them, but they keep coming back. Like reminders from somewhere else. Like proof that I'm still being watched. Still being monitored. My supervisor thinks I'm weird now. Too careful. Too cautious. But I know something he doesn't know. I know that sometimes you can be making a normal delivery on a normal day, and suddenly you're not normal anymore. I know that there are things out there that can make you disappear for 6 minutes and steal 2 gallons of your fuel. Things that can look inside your mind and leave you tagged for future reference. I know that the world is bigger and stranger than we want to believe. And I know that sometimes, when you're driving alone on a quiet road, you might find out just how strange it really is. The delivery route changed me. I'm still Tommy Castellano. Still drive for ups. Still take classes at night. But I'm also something else now. Something that's been examined, catalogued, and marked for future use. I just hope they don't come back for me. But I have a feeling they will. I should have stayed home that night. Should have called in sick. Should have done anything except walk into that control room and see every single alarm light blinking red at the same time. My name is Robert Kim, and I've been working at power plants for 14 years. I know every sound, every vibration, every smell that means something's wrong. But what happened that January night at Mountaineer Power Station wasn't in any training manual. It was 12:45 a.m. when I started my inspection. Rounds. The plant was humming a lot like always. Unit 1 running at 85% capacity. Unit 2 down for maintenance. Outside, it was a clear night, 19 degrees, no wind. Perfect conditions for our 120 megawatt coal-fired plant. I'd done this walk 1,000 times before. Check the turbine on Unit 2. Review the safety reports. Make sure everything was running smooth. We had 23 operators on shift that night. No more staffing. My tablet showed all green lights across the board. I've been married for 12 years. Got 2 kids at home. Live about 15 miles from the plant in a little house with a big yard. This job pays well 12-hour shifts. For days on, for days off. Good benefits. Steady work. The kind of job where you can raise a family and not worry about money. The plant itself is huge, 340 employees total when everyone's working. We burn coal to make steam. Steam turns the turbines. Turbines make electricity. Simple as that. But simple doesn't mean easy. Every piece of equipment has to work perfectly, or people lose power. Hospitals, schools, homes, they all depend on us. I was carrying my usual gear digital tablet for the inspection checklist.
radio to stay in touch with the control room, safety equipment, flashlight.
Standard stuff. We follow strict safety rules here.
Confined space procedures, lockout or tagger.
Protocols. Everything by the book. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission doesn't mess around, and neither do we. Walking through the plant at night always felt different. Quieter somehow. Just the steady hum of machinery and the occasional radio chatter. Most of the day shift was long gone. Just as night crew keeping the lights on for half the county. I'd been doing this job so long, I could spot problems before the computers did. A slight vibration in the turbine bearing. A temperature change that meant trouble down the line. Tonight felt normal, until it didn't. The first weird thing happened at 12:52. I was checking the Unit 2 turbine when my radio crackled with static. Not unusual, we get interference sometimes, but this was different. The static had a pattern to it.
Like someone was trying to send a message in code. Control room. This is Kim.
You getting any radio problems up there?
Negative, Kim.
Reading. U5 by 5. The static cleared up, and I kept walking.
But then I noticed the electrical grid frequency was fluctuating.
Just a little still within normal range, but I'd never seen it do that before. The frequency stays rock steady at 60 Hz. Always. My tablet started acting up next.
Network.
Connectivity issues. Then everything went back to normal. I shrugged it off.
Technology glitches happen. But then I realized something that made me stop walking.
The plant was too quiet.
I couldn't hear the cooling fans that should have been running.
The pump motors that usually hummed in the background were silent. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing. Just my own breathing and the distant
sound of the main turbine. That's when the emergency lighting kicked in.
Bright white lights flooded the hallway for about 10 seconds, then switched back to normal.
My radio squawked. Kim, you see those emergency lights? Yeah. What's that about? No
idea.
All systems show normal up here. I checked my tablet. Every reading was exactly where it should be. Temperature, pressure, electrical output, all normal. But the screen had flickered when the lights came on.
Just for a second. Then my radio picked up something strange.
A transmission on a frequency
we don't use.
Couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like coordinates, numbers and letters in a pattern that didn't match any of our call signs. I looked out the window toward the parking lot. 2 of the light fixtures were dimming and brightening.
Like someone was playing with a dimmer switch.
On and off, on and off.
But slowly, like breathing. The elevator motor started running.
I could hear it in the shaft next to me.
But according to my tablet, the elevator was parked on the ground floor and hadn't moved in 3 hours. Control room.
Someone using the elevator.
Negative. Shows stationary on our end.
I was starting to get that feeling you get when something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on it.
Like when you walk into your house and know someone's been there, even though nothing's obviously different. At 1:15, every alarm in the plant
went off at once. I'm talking about every single warning system we have.
Fire alarms, gas leak detectors, turbine overspeed warnings, electrical fault indicators, everything.
The noise was incredible, like standing inside a fire truck with all
the sirens blaring. Then, after exactly 30 seconds, they all stopped.
Just like that. Complete silence. My radio was going nuts.
Kim, what's your status? Kim, respond.
But when I tried to answer, my voice came back as an echo.
Like I was talking into a deep cave. The other operators were reporting the same thing.
Every radio conversation was echoing back at us. I looked up at the cooling tower and saw something that made no sense.
There was a shadow on the concrete wall, a perfect triangle, sharp-edged and dark. But there was nothing nearby that could cast that shadow.
No structure, no light source, nothing. My tablet was showing electrical readings that were impossible.
The distribution system was pulling 1,100 megawatts, but only producing 800. The missing 400 megawatts had to be going somewhere. But where?
Then it got worse.
My tablet started receiving data from sensors that didn't exist.
Temperature readings.
From cooling tower 7, we only have 2 cooling towers. Pressure measurements from turbine unit 5, we only have 2 turbines.
I ran to the control room.
The operators were staring at their screens with confused looks on their faces. We're getting readings from Beaver Valley. One of them said,
"That's 500 miles away," and Charleston said another.
How is that possible? The screens were showing information from other power plants across the region. Plants we had no connection to. Plants that were on completely different electrical grids. Outside, the cooling tower lights were creating patterns I'd never seen before. Not random flickering deliberate geometric shapes. Triangles, squares, lines that formed and dissolved like someone was drawing with light. My radio scanner was picking up conversations from plants in Ohio, Pennsylvania, even as far away as Virginia.
Operators reporting equipment starting up by itself, systems running without commands, readings that made no sense, and all of it was happening at exactly the same time.
1:17 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
At 1:18, I saw it. A massive shape hovering above our cooling towers.
Not a helicopter, not a plane, not anything I'd ever seen before. It was geometric angular like a cut diamond, but the size of a football field.
And it was completely silent. Light beams were coming from the bottom of it.
Not searchlights, these were focused. Precise beams that seemed to be examining our electrical infrastructure. The beams would touch a transformer, linger for a few seconds, then move to the next piece of equipment.
I grabbed my radio.
Control room. Do you see that thing above the towers?
Static.
Then a voice that sounded like mine but wasn't quite right. What thing, Kim?
The structure. The lights.
Kim, your signal is breaking up.
Say again. But I could hear myself clearly. The radio was producing some kind of interference that made my voice sound wrong when I transmitted. But I could receive just fine. Our information systems started shutting down. Not crashing, shutting down in sequence, like someone was turning off switches in a specific order. The backup systems kicked in automatically, but they were showing readings that couldn't be real. The light beams from the thing above were examining our electrical systems with surgical precision.
They'd focus on a transformer, and my tablet
would show that transformer specifications, voltage, capacity, maintenance history, information that should only be stored in our secure databases. The turbine monitoring equipment was showing impossible readings. Unit 1 was simultaneously running at 85% capacity and being completely shut down. Unit 2 was producing power despite being offline for maintenance. Then I lost time. I remember looking at my watch at 1:20. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the same spot, and my watch showed 1:41.
21 minutes had passed in what felt like a single moment. But the security system logs showed I'd been walking around for 41 minutes.
According to the cameras, I'd been moving through the plant, checking equipment, even having conversations with other operators. But I couldn't remember any of it. The thing above the towers was gone. The light beams were gone. The impossible readings on my tablet were gone. Everything was back to normal, except for the feeling that something had been inside my head.
Looking around, taking notes, I filed my report at 2:30 a.m. Facility-wide electrical anomaly. All systems restored to normal operation.
No equipment damage. No safety issues. That was it. What else could I say?
That a giant silent thing had hovered over our power plant and somehow accessed our computer systems.
That I'd lost 20 minutes of my life.
That every operator in the region had experienced.
The same thing at the same time. Nobody else seemed to remember the details. They remembered the alarms, the radio problems, the weird computer readings.
But when I asked about the thing above the towers, they just looked at me funny. What thing, Kim?
I requested a transfer to day shift the next week.
Told them I wanted to take some continuing education classes. They approved it without question. I started avoiding overtime.
Used to work extra shifts whenever I could, the money was good.
Now I just wanted to go home to my family after 8 hours and forget about the plant until the next day. But I couldn't stop thinking about it.
I called operators at other plants in the region.
Quietly, carefully.
A few of them mentioned strange incidents around the same time.
Equipment acting up. Systems showing impossible readings. Time that didn't seem to add up right. None of them had filed detailed reports.
None of them wanted to talk about it officially.
In this business, you don't want to be the guy who sees things that aren't there. I bought a personal EMF detector. Started carrying it with me at work. Most of the time, it reads normal background levels.
But sometimes, usually around 1:20 a.m., it starts clicking rapidly.
Like something's putting out a lot of electromagnetic energy. Something that's not supposed to be there. That was 8 months ago. I still work at the plant. Still do my job. But I don't do the midnight inspections anymore. I stick to day shift. Stay around other people. Keep my mouth shut about what I saw, because I know what I saw.
And I know it's still out there, watching our power plants, studying our electrical
systems, learning how we make the electricity that keeps our world running. And I don't think it's done with us yet. Every night when I drive home, I look up at the sky above the cooling towers. Most nights, there's nothing there, just stars and darkness. But sometimes, if I look just right, I can see a faint outline against the stars. Geometric, silent, waiting, and I know that whatever happened that January night wasn't an accident. It was an inspection. The question is, what are they planning to do with what they learned? I still can't look at hotel elevators the same way.
Not after what happened that night in August.
Not after I watched one travel to floors that don't exist.
My name is Jennifer Walsh, and I've been running night shifts at hotels for 6 years.
It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills while I save for graduate school. The Hampton Inn and Suites of Interstate 75 in northern Georgia was my home base, a 4-story property built in 2015. Clean and modern, the kind of place business travelers and families choose for reliable comfort.
Wednesday night, August 28th, to 15 a.m. I was doing what I always do, the night audit.
For those who don't know, that's when we balance all the day's transactions, run reports, and make sure everything adds up. Our property had 84 rooms, and we were sitting at 67% occupancy.
Pretty typical for a weeknight. The lobby was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Interstate 75. Even at this hour, you could hear the 18-wheelers rolling north and south, carrying goods between Atlanta and Macon. The weather was typical for late August in Georgia, 76 degrees. Humid enough to make your shirt stick to your back if you stepped outside. I had my routine down to a science. Check the computer system. Review any incident reports from the evening. Shift. Make sure the housekeeping supervisor had finished her rounds. Tonight, that was Maria, who was restocking towels on the 3rd floor.
Our maintenance guy, Dave, was probably in the basement checking the pool chemicals. The property management system showed everything normal.
Guest services were running smooth.
The 24-hour fitness center was empty. Pool was closed for the night, and I'd already started prepping the continental breakfast area for the morning rush.
Coffee makers were ready, fruit was cut, and the waffle batter was mixed. I liked the night shift. It was peaceful, gave me time to study between tasks. Tonight I had my accounting textbook open, working through depreciation problems. The front desk phone rarely rang after midnight, and when it did, it was usually a guest who couldn't figure out the air conditioning or needed extra towels. The hotel felt solid around me, reliable.
I knew every sound: the ice machine cycling on the 2nd floor, the elevator motor humming when someone pressed a button, the way the building settled as the temperature dropped. After 6 years of night shifts, you learn to read a building like a book. My radio crackled softly on the desk.
Standard two-way communication with Maria and Dave.
Corporate policy required us to check in every hour, just to make sure everyone was safe and accounted for.
The property had been incident-free for 8 months. No break-ins, no emergencies, no problems. I was good at my job.
Management had already hinted about promoting me to assistant manager once I finished my degree.
The Hampton Inn was part of a respected chain, and I took pride in maintaining their standards. Every guest interaction mattered. Every system had to work perfectly. The computer screen showed our check-in list for tomorrow, excuse me, today.
Wednesday was always busy with business travelers heading to Atlanta. I'd need to make sure the breakfast area was stocked extra well. That's when I heard the elevator. The elevator shouldn't have been moving. I knew exactly where every guest was. The system tracked key card access, and nobody had used the elevators in over an hour. But there it was, that familiar hum of the motor, the soft ding of arrival. I looked up from my textbook.
The elevator indicator showed it had stopped at the 2nd floor. The doors opened with their usual whisper, then closed again after 30 seconds.
Nobody got on or off. The hallway was empty. I could see it clearly on the security monitor.
Probably just a maintenance cycle, I told myself.
Modern elevators run self-diagnostics.
Nothing unusual about that. But then the room key card reader started acting up. I noticed it first on the 2nd floor monitor.
The little LED lights on. The door locks were flashing in sequence. Room 201, 202, 203, 104, like dominoes falling. Red light, then green, then back to red. But the system wasn't showing any keycard activity. No guests were trying to get into their rooms. The HVAC system changed pitch. It was subtle, the kind of thing you only notice when you've listened to the same sound for years. The frequency shifted higher, then lower, like someone was playing with the controls. I checked the computer system. Everything looked normal, but then I saw something that made me frown. The guest check-in log was showing new arrivals: rooms 501, 502, 503.
But we only had 4 floors. There were no rooms in the 500s. Must be a glitch, I said out loud, just to hear my own voice.
The silence was starting to feel heavy. I called Dave on the radio. Dave, you getting any weird readings down there?
Static crackled back. What kind of readings? HVAC sounds different. And I'm seeing some computer errors. Hold on, a pause.
Yeah, I'm showing some network issues. Connection keeps dropping and coming back. The lobby lights dimmed slightly, then brightened back to normal.
It happened so fast, I almost missed it. The phone system display showed a communication error with corporate, then cleared. I walked over to the front windows and looked out at the parking lot.
4 of the light fixtures were flickering in perfect sync on, off.
Not randomly, but in a pattern, like they were connected to the same switch. Back at the desk, the property management system was showing network connectivity issues. The screen displayed a spinning circle. Then suddenly everything was back to normal. All the reports loaded fine. All the systems showed green from somewhere in the building. I heard the ice machine dispensing. The sound was unmistakable, that grinding, chunking noise as cubes dropped into the bin. But the hallway monitors showed empty corridors.
No guests were getting ice. I made a note in the incident log. Minor electrical fluctuations. To 30 a.m., all systems operational. But even as I wrote it, I knew this wasn't normal.
In 6 years of night shifts, I'd never seen so many small problems at once. Individual glitches, sure, but everything acting up together? That was new. The building felt different somehow, like it was holding its breath.
At 2:47 a.m., every phone in the hotel started ringing. Not the guest room phones, I would have seen that on the system.
These were the house phones.
The one at the front desk, the one in the breakfast area, the one in the laundry room, the one in Dave's maintenance office.
All at once, all ringing the same harsh electronic tone. I grabbed the front desk phone.
Dead silence.
No dial tone. No caller, nothing. The ringing stopped after exactly 10 seconds.
Then everything went quiet again. My radio crackled. Dave, you there?
Yeah, but something's wrong with the radio.
You hear that echo? I keyed the MIC.
Testing, testing. My voice came back a second later, like I was talking in a tunnel. Testing, testing, testing. That's when I noticed the shadow in the parking lot.
It was geometric, perfectly straight lines forming a triangle about 30 feet across, but there was nothing above it to cast that shadow.
The light poles were round, the building had curved edges, and there were no aircraft in the sky. Just this sharp, dark triangle sitting on the asphalt like someone had painted it there. The emergency lighting system kicked in all the red exit signs and battery-powered floods.
For 45 seconds, the hotel was lit up like there was a
fire alarm.
Then everything went back to normal. I was reaching for the phone to call corporate when the computer started beeping. New reservations were coming in, but not from any booking system I recognized.
The confirmation codes were wrong to many digits, strange letter combinations that didn't match our format. The elevator was moving again.
But this time, the indicators showed floors that didn't exist.
B1, we didn't have a basement. Floor 5.
We only had 4 floors.
Floor 6, impossible. I watched the numbers change on the display. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, B1, and back to 1.
The elevator was traveling to places that weren't there. The parking lot lights were doing something I'd never seen
before.
Instead of the normal random pattern when they flickered, they were creating shapes.
Geometric configurations that looked almost like signals, like someone was trying to communicate using the light fixtures. My phone rang, not the desk phone. My personal cell phone, which I kept in my purse. Hello, Jennifer. This is Mike from the Hampton Inn in Valdosta. Valdosta was 300 miles south of here.
Mike, how did you get this number?
I'm calling on the house phone.
We're having some equipment problems and somehow got connected to your property. That's impossible. House phones don't make outside calls. I know, but here we are.
You having any weird stuff happen up there?
Before I could answer, the line went dead. The guest room televisions were turning on.
I could see it on the security monitors one by one, screens lighting up in sequence.
Room to 101, to 102, to 103, all the way down the hall.
But they weren't showing any channels, just blue screens with no signal. The credit card processing system failed. All 3 terminals showed error messages at the same time. Then they rebooted and started working again. I tried to call Dave, but got that echo again.
My voice bouncing back at me from somewhere far away. That's when I saw it through the window. The thing above our hotel was the size of a city block dot. It made no sound. That's what got me first. Something that big should have been roaring like a jet engine. But it was completely silent. Even the Interstate 75 traffic noise had stopped. The whole world had gone quiet except for the hum of the hotel's air conditioning. It was geometric, like the shadow in the parking lot, but 3-dimensional.
Angular surfaces that reflected our parking lot lights in impossible ways.
It wasn't a typical flying saucer, it was more like a floating building. Dark metal with seams and edges that caught the light. Light beams started scanning the hotel.
Not searchlights, these were different. Focused, precise beams that seemed
to be reading the building like a barcode scanner.
They moved systematically across the roof, down the walls, across the parking lot. I grabbed my radio.
Dave, are you seeing this?
The radio produced a sound I'd never heard before, not static, but something structured, like interference, but with a pattern, like the radio waves were being reorganized into something else. The property management system shut down, not a crash, a clean shutdown, like someone had turned off the power. But the backup systems kicked in immediately, and the emergency lighting came back on. The light beams were examining specific parts of the hotel.
The elevator shaft,
the electrical room, the phone connections, like they were mapping our infrastructure.
Understanding how everything worked, I tried to use my cell phone to take a picture, but the screen stayed black.
The camera app wouldn't open.
The phone was working, I could see the time. The battery level, but none of the apps would start. The guest room monitoring equipment was going crazy. Temperature sensors, motion detectors, door contacts, everything was showing readings that made no sense.
Rooms showing occupancy when they were empty.
Temperature readings of 200 degrees, then -50.
Motion in rooms where the security camera showed nothing. I looked at my watch. 3:18 a.m. I looked at the computer clock. 3:36 a.m., 18 minutes had passed, but the clocks showed 34 minutes. Time was moving wrong. The beams of light were getting brighter, more focused. One of them swept across the lobby windows, and for a second I felt something, not pain, but a sensation like being scanned, like something was looking through me, reading me. The elevator indicator was showing floors that went up to 15 now. The building was growing, at least according to the elevator. I could hear it moving, the motor working harder, going to places that couldn't exist. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the thing was gone. And no dramatic departure, no flash of light.
1 second it was there, the next second it wasn't.
The interstate traffic noise came back. The normal sounds of the hotel returned. All the systems came back online at exactly the same time. The property management system booted up. The phones started working. The elevator returned to normal operation. Everything was back to the way it was supposed to be, except for the clock discrepancy and the memory of those 18 minutes that felt like a lifetime. The incident report was the hardest thing I ever wrote. Property-wide electrical anomaly. 3:36 a.m. All systems restored to normal operation. No guest complaints. No property damage. Recommend electrical inspection during next maintenance cycle. I couldn't write what really happened. Who would believe it? And more importantly, who would trust someone who claimed to see impossible things? During a night shift, I'd worked too hard to build my reputation. I submitted the report and started my transfer request that morning. Told management I needed to switch to day shift for my graduate school schedule. They approved it without question. I called other night managers at Hampton Inn properties across Georgia. 3 of them had similar stories from the past 6 months. Equipment failures, system glitches last time, but nobody was talking about it officially. Nobody wanted to sound crazy. I started researching our hotel's blueprints. The building was exactly what it was supposed to be for floors. Standard construction, nothing unusual. But I downloaded an EMF detector app on my phone anyway, just in case. 4 months later, I'm working day shift. I handle check-ins, deal with complaints, coordinate with housekeeping, normal hotel management stuff. I'm good at it, and I sleep better at night. But I still can't look at elevators the same way. When I see the floor indicator change, I remember that night when it showed floors that didn't exist. When I hear the motor humming, I think about that thing scanning our building like it was studying us. The other night managers who had similar experiences. 2 of them transferred to different properties. One quit the hotel business entirely. We don't talk about it, but we all know something happened. Something that doesn't fit into incident reports or corporate policies. I still save money for graduate school. I still do my job well. But now, I know that the ordinary world, the world of night audits and system reports and reliable routines is not as solid as I thought it was. Sometimes, late at night when I'm at home, I hear helicopters or planes overhead, and I step outside to look up at the sky, just to make sure they're the right shape, just to make sure they're from here, because now I know that some things aren't.